Chapter 121, Dealing with the Iron Throne. Gavin tidied up his slightly messy clothes and was about to walk into the city lord's mansion when he saw Daenerys running towards him. Daenerys rushed to Gavin desperately, and rushed into his warm and solid arms. She hugged his waist tightly with both hands, and said in a choked and trembling voice, "Gavin, you are finally back. I missed you so much. I have been looking forward to your return every moment these days." Gavin also hugged Daenerys tightly, as if he wanted to rub her into his body and give her endless comfort. His eyes scanned Daenerys anxiously and asked worriedly, "My dear, are you hurt?" Daenerys rested her head on Gavin's chest, shook her head gently, and said, "I'm fine, Gavin. Fortunately, with Brienne's protection, I can wait for you to come back safely." At this time, Gavin turned his eyes away from Daenerys and saw Brienne standing behind her with a serious face. A sincere smile immediately appeared on his face, and he said with gratitude, "Thank you very much, Miss Brienne. I will remember your help." Brienne straightened her back and said solemnly, "Please don't call me Miss, Lord Gawain. I am a knight now." Gavin was slightly startled after hearing this, with a hint of surprise in his eyes. He then noticed the dark sister around her waist, and then looked at Daenerys, seeking confirmation with his eyes. Daenerys smiled and nodded, saying, "Well, yes, I think Brienne is brave and fearless. She is fully qualified to be a knight. I knighted her myself." Gavin smiled with satisfaction after hearing this. He looked at Brienne again and said, "Thank you very much, Knight Brienne. Your achievements will be praised forever." Brienne bowed and said firmly, "It is my duty, Lord Gawain. It is an honor to serve you, Your Highness." Gavin gently took Daenerys' hand, his eyes firm and powerful, and said, "Come on, let's go in and discuss how to deal with the threat to the Iron Throne next." Everyone walked into the city lord's mansion together, ready to face the coming storm. Gavin and everyone else walked into the hall and took their seats one after another. Daenerys waved to the waiters beside her, and several waiters immediately brought wine jugs to fill everyone's glasses. Gavin picked up the wine glass and drank it all, alleviating the thirst from the journey. Then Gavin looked around at everyone calmly and asked solemnly, "Who can tell me the details of the situation?" Coben immediately stood up, took out 2 pieces of paper from his pocket, handed them to Gavin respectfully and said, "Sir, this is the testimony obtained from the assassin. I interrogated him personally." Gavin took it and read it with a focused and serious expression. After a long time, he closed the paper, frowned slightly, and couldn't help but fall into deep thought. Littlefinger's name appeared in this assassination, and Gavin couldn't help but wonder, was this an order issued by Robert Baratheon, or was it a private trick by Littlefinger to create chaos and conflict? However, after thinking for a moment, Gavin smiled indifferently, thinking that the truth behind this was not so important, and at this moment, his relationship with the Iron Throne had reached a freezing point. Then he turned his gaze to Boris and asked, "Are those tax collectors sent by the Iron Throne still on Bloodstone Island?" Boris quickly stood up and responded respectfully, "My lord, I have detained all the tax collectors from the Iron Throne, including those who got off the ship with them. The taxes they collected before have also been successfully recovered." Gavin nodded slightly and said approvingly, "Well done, Boris. Expel them all from the stepstones." Then, Gavin looked at Qyburn and ordered, "Send ravens to deliver a message to the nobles of the 7 kingdoms, severely condemning Robert Baratheon's despicable assassination. If he still has a shred of honor, I am willing to challenge him to a duel." Hearing Gavin's words, Daenerys looked frightened and looked at Gavin with concern. Gavin gently patted her hand to comfort her, and said with a smile, "Believe in my strength." Then he looked at Qyburn and said, "Write it down, and keep an eye on Stannis and the royal fleet, and report any actions immediately." Qyburn bowed and responded, "Yes, my lord." At this moment, Governor Harvey stood up and asked, "Lord Gavin, how is the war going in Rhys?" When everyone heard Harvey's question, they looked at Gavin curiously. Obviously, they were also curious about the progress of capturing Rhys. Gavin said with a faint smile on his face, "We have successfully taken over all the land in Rhys. Hassan is currently digesting the results of this victory, reorganizing the prisoners, and repairing the captured warships. Next, in Essos, as long as Mir and Tyrosh don't come to provoke us, I don't plan to make any big moves for the time being." At this point, Gavin turned to Boris and asked, "If I remember correctly, the latest batch of officials trained by the academy are about to graduate, right?" Boris responded immediately, "Yes, sir. The assessment will be conducted next month, and after the assessment, they can be sent to various places in the territory. Hearing this answer, Gavin said to Boris and Harvey, you two will select a group of experienced and capable officers from Bloodstone Island and Grey Gallows Island to send to Rees. You can select the officers who graduated this time first to supplement your team of officers. After hearing this, the two looked at each other, and saw a bitter smile and helplessness in each other's eyes, and then they both bowed and accepted the order. Gavin then instructed Coben, who was standing beside him, you also have to send a few of your apprentices to Rees. There is no crow's nest there yet. Go and establish communications first, and then see if there are any suitable seedlings there to be trained in the academy. After hearing this, Coben thought for a moment and responded, Sir, why don't I go there myself? Those apprentices don't have much experience. Gavin shook his head and said, we can't leave you here in the Stone Steps Islands for the time being. You still have to supervise those shipyards. The foundation of our foothold here is the fleet, and warships are the most important. Coben nodded in response, yes, sir, I understand. Gavin breathed a sigh of relief and said with a firm and steady look, everyone, the current situation is complicated and unpredictable. We have enemies on both the east and west sides. We must seize the opportunity to consolidate our forces in order to deal with the war that may occur at any time. Everyone responded in unison, we will follow your orders, sir. Chapter 122, Robert the Irritable. In the boundless sky, the huge and agile figure of the blazing shadow flapped its wings and flew high, while Gavin and Daenerys sat firmly on the dragon's back, their clothes fluttering in the wind. Blazing Shadow's broad dragon wings flapped vigorously, taking them to the direction of Dragonflame Bay. Gavin planned to hatch more dragons after this return to increase their strength. Soon, the blazing shadow flew over the Dragonflame Bay and rushed down into the deep dragon's lair like a flash of lightning. Inside the dragon's lair, the three young dragons, Yuns Huang, Wu Ying, and Jiao Jiao, have grown a lot. They are having fun, hitting and chasing each other, stirring up dust. However, when Blazing's terrifying roar was heard, the originally noisy scene instantly fell silent. The three young dragons stopped their movements and hid aside obediently, with awe and obedience in their eyes. Blazing Shadow flew gracefully into the dragon's lair and landed steadily on the huge stone platform. Gavin and Daenerys jumped off the dragon's back steadily. Gavin called out in his mind, and Cloudfrost, Mist Shadow, and Horn immediately sensed it, flew out excitedly, and kept roaring around Gavin, as if telling of their thoughts and joy. Daenerys also hurriedly gave instructions to the blood dragon guards at the side, and soon a basin of fresh tender meat was brought over. Seeing this, Vice Ryan at the side also squeezed over. At this time, his body was more than 1 meter long, and he pushed the three baby dragons aside with one collision. Gavin immediately calmed the dragons. He fed the three cheerful and grown-up dragons and Vice Ryan skillfully, and whispered to Daenerys, when we are done with this, you can come with me to Lys. I think it is safer to leave you by my side now. Daenerys leaned against Gavin tenderly and said in a soft voice, I'll do as you say, Gavin. At this time, the dragon's cave was filled with an atmosphere of warmth and tranquility, as if the wind and rain from the outside world could not invade this place. King's Landing, the Red Keep. At the same time, in the Imperial Conference Hall, the atmosphere was solemn and a tense Imperial meeting was being held. Robert Baratheon looked gloomy, staring at Peter with wide eyes, and scolded, Littlefinger, the assassin you found this time is completely useless, far worse than last time, and there is still no news. Peter hurriedly explained in fear and trepidation, Your Majesty, the enemy's defense is too tight. It will be difficult to break through in a short time. The assassination is extremely difficult. It is normal that there is no news for the time being. We need to wait patiently. Robert turned his gaze to Varys, the intelligence chief known as the Eight-Clawed Spider, and said, I heard that the Remnant also has a baby dragon. Varys stood up and responded respectfully, Yes, Your Majesty. Although there is no definite information from the Stepstones, countless gossips and rumors are spreading. If nothing unexpected happens, it is true that Princess Daenerys has a baby dragon. It is a red baby dragon. But Your Majesty, you don't have to worry. It takes a long time for a baby dragon to grow up, and it is difficult for it to form combat power in a short time. Robert was furious when he heard this. He slammed the wine glass in his hand on the table, splashing the wine. He angrily scolded the ministers below, but she is going to marry Gavin Bellarese. That traitor has a big dragon and a fleet. What use do I have for you rubbish? Don't you know how much impact it will have on the kingdom if Targaryen has a dragon? Then, he looked at Littlefinger fiercely and ordered, find more assassins, send more, and make sure to get rid of her. If there is a chance, get rid of Gavin too. Littlefinger looked helpless and could only bite the bullet and explain, Your Majesty, it is extremely dangerous to assassinate Daenerys and Gavin right now. I am afraid that not many people are willing to do it. Moreover, even if the assassination is successful, it will be difficult to succeed in a short period of time. The defense of the Stepstone Islands is very strict now. For some reason, foreign ships are not allowed to land on the island recently. They can only replenish supplies and fresh water at the port. Robert calmed down a little after hearing this, sat in a chair, and drank the red wine in the glass. He felt upset at the moment, and things became a mess. In the past, Jon Arryn always gave him advice, but since his death, even the daily political affairs bothered him. And his brother Stannis summoned him from Dragonstone to King's Landing many times, but he refused to respond. He wanted to launch a war against the Stepstones, but he could not do so because of his non-cooperation. Robert knew that Stannis had always wanted the position of Hand of the King, but he did not like his brother and was really unwilling to give it to him. If he gave the position of Hand of the King to Stannis, he would probably have to see his ugly face every day in the future. He might even close all the brothels in King's Landing. Thinking of these troubles, he wanted to drink another glass but found that the glass beside him was empty. Robert scolded Lancel behind him again, Fool from Lannister, don't you see that your king's glass is empty? Lancel immediately trembled and quickly filled Robert's glass with wine. Robert drank it all again, and the red wine flowed down the corners of his mouth and soaked his beard. The wine did not calm Robert's mood. He frowned and sighed heavily. Then he looked straight at Pycere, who had been sitting below for a long time without saying anything. He asked gloomily, any news about the ravens sent to the north? When Pythias heard the question, he couldn't help but tremble. He stood up tremblingly, bowed deeply and said, Your Majesty, I haven't received a reply from Winterfell yet. After all, serving as the Prime Minister is related to the important affairs of the kingdom. I believe that Lord Ned Stark is also considering it carefully and needs time to make a decision. Robert snorted coldly, his face full of dissatisfaction and irritability. I knew he was a stubborn person. I'm afraid I have to go to the north myself. Then, Robert turned his gaze to Barristan behind him and ordered in an unquestionable tone, prepare guards and ships. I need to go to Dragonstone to talk to Stannis. In the meantime, prepare for the trip to the north. We will set out when I return. Also inform the Queen that she and the children, as well as my heir Joffrey, will also be accompanying us. Barristan did not dare to be negligent after hearing this. He immediately bowed and said, As you command, Your Majesty. When everyone in the royal meeting heard Robert's order, they were all silent. No one dared to speak easily, and the atmosphere in the whole room became increasingly depressing and heavy. Robert's brows were still furrowed. Looking at the group of yes-men sitting below, the annoyance in his heart grew heavier like a tangled mess. Then he ignored the ministers and stood up to leave. Seeing this, everyone stood up to show their respect. Chapter 123 Dragonstone. The Water Gardens is a beautiful place in Sunspear. The trees are lush and green, and tall palm trees sway in the breeze. A clear stream flows through it, sparkling and gurgling like the sound of nature. Colorful flowers compete with each other in beauty, and the fragrance is so rich that countless butterflies dance. Exquisite fountains are dotted in an orderly manner, splashing water and shining brightly under the bright sunshine. And the tranquil lake is like a huge mirror, reflecting the blue sky, white clouds, and the charming surrounding scenery clearly. In a magnificent room, Prince Doran convened a family meeting, and all direct members of the Martell family were present. Everyone looked at Prince Doran with doubts, full of curiosity about the specific content of the meeting. Seeing that everyone had arrived, Doran, who was sitting in a wheelchair, took out a piece of exquisite parchment from the box beside him and handed it to his eldest son Quentyn Martell. Then he said, This is a marriage contract we signed with the Targaryen family more than 10 years ago. The marriage contract is between you and Daenerys Targaryen. This marriage contract is little known. Now, I want you to go to the Stepstones to find Daenerys Targaryen, ask her to fulfill the marriage contract, and bring her back to Dorne. Princess Arianne, who was standing by, raised an objection immediately after hearing this. Father, I heard that Daenerys Targaryen is going to marry Gavin Bellarys, Lord of the Stepstones. He not only has a dragon, but also a huge fleet and army. Even if we have an engagement, if Quentin rashly goes to take away his fiancée, it will surely anger Gavin Bellarese, and I'm afraid that Quentin's safety will be difficult to guarantee. Prince Doran heard his daughter's objection and waved his hand and said, I just got the accurate information that Daenerys Targaryen has a red dragon. A Targaryen surname plus a dragon is worth doing this. Oberyn Martell, the Red Viper, objected, saying, if Daenerys really had a dragon, Gavin Bellarese would not let it go easily. Such behavior would be a humiliation for everyone. Dorne is likely to go to war with the Stepstones. Young Tristana Martell chimed in, Father, my uncle is right. If we do this, Dorne will inevitably go to war with Gavin Bellarese. The Stepstones have a much stronger fleet than Dorne, and they have a dragon. It wasn't that long ago that we suffered the loss of Earl the Black Shark, and the Dornish are not good at naval warfare. I don't think Daenerys's dragon is worth the risk. Prince Doran nodded and said, I know that, so I plan to give Gavin Bellarese a fiancé. Then he looked at his daughter Arianne and said, I plan to form a marriage alliance with him and marry you to him. What do you think? After hearing this, Arianne was somewhat reluctant. In Dorne's inheritance law, men and women are equal, regardless of gender differences. As the eldest daughter, Arianne is the heir to sons pair. However, if she chooses to marry Gavin, a powerful lord from the outside world, she may lose her inheritance rights, and the lords under his rule will support her younger brother Quentyn Martell. Arianne was silent for a moment before she said, I don't think Gavin Bellarese will give up the opportunity to marry Daenerys Targaryen and claim Westeros in favour of an alliance with Dorne. Prince Doran said calmly, Gawain Bellarese stepstones are controlled by our broken arm of Dorne, and 1/3 of the trade routes are controlled by us. We can cut off the trade routes at any time and strangle Gavin Bellarese's lifeline. The economy of the Stepstones is controlled by us Dorne, and it is reported that he is currently at war with Lys. I don't think he will easily start a two-front war. Moreover, because of Daenerys, the Iron Throne may go to war with the Stepstones at any time. Gavin needs allies at this time, and we in Dorne are the only ones who can help him. Oberyn Martell immediately said, if Quentyn succeeds in marrying Daenerys, will we become the primary target of the Iron Throne? Robert Baratheon has even disregarded his honor in order to completely destroy the Targaryen family. Accurate news came from Braavos that Viserys Targaryen was killed by the assassins he sent. Once Daenerys comes to Dorne, without the barrier of the sea, Robert will probably attack immediately. Prince Doran shook his head and explained, as far as I know, the current Iron Throne is unable to go to war. Robert Baratheon is extravagant, and the kingdom's finances have long been overwhelmed. Even if the Iron Throne goes to war with us in Dorne, the other party will not be able to conquer Dorne. After a pause, he looked at Quentyn Martell and said, this is just an attempt. Discuss the marriage with Gavin first. If he disagrees, find an opportunity to contact Daenerys privately. It would be best if you can get Daenerys with a dragon. After all, this trip is dangerous. It's up to you to decide whether to go or not. After hearing this, Quentyn Martell stood up and said firmly, Father, I want to give it a try. Whether it is marrying Daenerys or marrying Gavin Bellarese, it is undoubtedly a good thing for our Martell family. Daolang nodded and instructed, that's it, be careful. On the rough sea, a ship flying the flag of the Crown and Stag bravely moved forward in the strong wind and waves, riding the wind and waves, and slowly sailed towards Dragonstone. Dragonstone is like a ferocious beast rising from the sea, with jagged rocks and steep cliffs like sharp fangs, which is daunting. On the steep cliffs stands an ancient and majestic castle, which seems to be a witness of the years, and still stands tall despite the wind and rain. The castle is built on the mountain, winding up, and blends in with the rocks. A ceremonial guard was the first to disembark. They lined up neatly, dressed in gorgeous clothes, holding colorful flags and spears, and looked solemn. The sea breeze whistled past, and the colorful flags fluttered. Robert Baratheon also got off the boat, and as soon as he stepped onto the shore, he saw the messenger who came to greet him. However, the person who came to greet him was not Stannis, but Axel Florent, the acting lord of Dragonstone. Stannis' absence made Robert feel a little rude, and his brows slightly frowned, but soon relaxed, and he did not intend to dwell on this matter too much. Robert asked directly, where is Stannis? Axel Florent hurriedly responded, waiting for your majesty in the map room. Robert snorted, a hint of dissatisfaction flashed in his eyes, then he strode past him and walked towards the castle. He climbed up the winding stairs, his heavy steps were a little difficult. After a while, he was panting slightly, and beads of sweat oozed out of his forehead. He was no longer as young and energetic as he was in the past. Now he was out of breath just by climbing these steps. Soon, he was led by the waiter through a winding corridor. On the walls on both sides of the corridor were hung ancient portraits and sculptures, as if telling of the splendor and glory of the past. Finally, they arrived at the map room. Robert reached out and pushed open the ancient and heavy door, and a stale smell came to his face. He saw Stannis waiting there, standing quietly in front of a huge map table with an expressionless face. Chapter 124. Voluntas Action. Stannis bowed expressionlessly and said, "Good day, Your Majesty, and welcome to Dragonstone." Robert sneered, "I don't want to come at all, Stannis. It's not easy to see you if you come to King's Landing." Stannis remained expressionless. Robert sat in his chair helplessly and angrily and said, "I want to conquer the Stepstones. Is the royal fleet confident that it can defeat their navy?" Stannis said, "I'm not sure. The royal fleet has cooperated with Gawain Bellery's warships to chase pirates before. Unlike the pirates of the Iron Islands, their warships are very powerful and are all tall sailing warships. Most of our fleet is composed of low longships. In a normal naval battle, it may take the cooperation of 4 or 5 longships to sink a sailing warship. Longships are not as powerful as sailing warships in terms of impact and defense." Robert said angrily, "I spent so much money on the royal fleet, and this is the combat effectiveness? So weak." Stannis retorted, "You have spent most of your money on entertainment, banquets, and tournaments. Since the rebellion of the Iron Islands, the Council has allocated no money for the repair or replacement of ships in the royal fleet." Robert knew he was in the wrong and said, "I'll let Littlefinger figure out the money." Stannis scoffed, "Where do you want to borrow it from?" Robert looked at Stannis coldly and said, "Be careful what you say, Stannis. You are speaking to your king now." The hall was filled with a tense atmosphere. After a moment, Robert suppressed his anger and said calmly, "I want you to send a ship to monitor the Stepstone Islands and recruit sailors for training. The money will be allocated soon." Stannis said, "That's no problem." He paused and then said, "The king's hand Jonaran has passed away. The king's council cannot be without a prime minister. I wonder what your majesty thinks of the new king's hand." Robert knew what Stannis meant. He stood up and sneered, "I want Ned Stark to be the new prime minister." Stannis was furious when he heard this. His brother would rather believe outsiders than his own brother. Stannis quickly suppressed his anger and said sincerely, "I recommend myself as the prime minister. I believe I can do better than Jonaran and more suitable than Eddard Stark." Robert waved his hand and said perfunctorily, "There are more important things for you to do now. You should serve as the Minister of the Navy and manage the royal fleet first." Then he stood up and was about to walk out of the hall, but suddenly stopped and turned around. "Where is my niece Shireen? I want to see her." Stannis responded, "In the gardens at the back. I'll have a servant take you there." Robert nodded, and strode out under the guidance of the waiter. Stannis looked at Robert's receding figure, his lips tightly pursed, wanting to say something but stopping himself. In the end, he just lowered his head silently and said nothing. A few months ago, a mysterious letter was delivered to him. When he opened the envelope, the contents of the letter were like a thunder in his mind. The letter said that Jonaran discovered that none of the 3 children born to Robert Baratheon by Queen Cersei was Robert's biological child. After this secret was revealed, Jonaran was poisoned by the Lannister family. Now, the Lannisters have pointed their spearheads at him, Stannis. Upon learning of this, he hurriedly conducted a brief investigation, then anxiously left King's Landing, which was rife with danger, and rushed all the way to Dragonstone. He knew very well that Robert, who was prejudiced against him, would not believe his words and might even suspect him of plotting to seize the Iron Throne. Stannis just learned that the position of Prime Minister had been given to Ned Stark. Stannis decided to suppress his inner turmoil for the time being and wait for Ned to arrive in King's Landing before discussing the matter with him. In the fiery dragon cave, with a series of crisp cracking sounds, cracks began to appear on the 3 dragon eggs. The first dragon that emerged from the shell was covered with dazzling golden scales, shining as brightly as the sun under the firelight. Then, a dragon with deep blue scales poked its head out, its eyes like the mysterious deep sea. The last dragon born had bright red scales like a raging fire, as if burning with endless passion. With the birth of the baby dragon, Gavin felt something and opened his panel to look at it. Host, Gavin Belleris. Age, 18, bloodline blood and fire dragonborn, developed 68% blood of the Dragon King, possesses the ability to control dragons and flames, and has fire resistance. Domination. 60/68. Your slaves can be upgraded via the panel. 40 primary blood dragon guards, blood witch puppets made with dragon blood, can be advanced twice. 8 high-level blood dragon guards, can no longer be upgraded. 1 adult dragons, magical creatures made of blood and fire that cannot be advanced. 6 baby dragons, magical creatures made of blood and fire, unable to advance in infancy. 5 dragon eggs, unhatched baby dragons, hatchable. Skill Fire Mastery, Legend Sword Art, Legend Sunblade, Legend Bow, Master Lance, Mastery. Energy Points, 36, obtained by automatically absorbing the magic power floating around, or actively absorbing magic power. Looking at the 3 baby dragons that appeared on Domination, Gavin became more and more excited about controlling the dragons. Then he and Daenerys took care of the baby dragons together. At this moment, Coban hurried in. The hot dragon cave made him sweat profusely, and his forehead was covered with beads of sweat. He raised his sleeve and wiped the sweat from his forehead vigorously. Coban walked quickly to Gavin, handed him a letter that was slightly soaked with sweat, and said, "Sir, there is a new situation in the disputed land." Daenerys and Gavin's gaze instantly shifted from the newborn dragon to the letter, and their expressions became solemn. After receiving the letter, Gavin opened it and read it immediately. His brows were furrowed, and his face became more solemn. He thought that Myr would be the first to take action, but he did not expect that Volantis Tiger Cloak army had already deployed troops at the border of the disputed land. Gavin took a deep breath, handed the letter to Qyburn beside him, and said in a deep voice, "Daenerys and I will fly to Lys tomorrow. You must keep a close eye on the actions of the Iron Throne and speed up the construction of warships here." Coban bowed and accepted the order, and said respectfully, "Please rest assured, sir." Afterwards, Gavin carefully handed the 3 baby dragons to the blood dragon guards and instructed them to be fed regularly, then he hurriedly left the dragon's lair with Daenerys. Chapter 125, Speculations about Volantis. On the way back to the manor, Gavin's thoughts were always occupied by the actions of Volantis. As the oldest slave-owning free trade city-state, Volantis, despite having experienced many defeats in the long river of history, is undoubtedly still the most powerful city-state in the southwest of Essos. For hundreds of years, it had been constantly at war with Tyrosh, Myr, and Lys, and despite being outnumbered alone, it showed no sign of weakness, forcing the 3 kingdoms to form a 3-city alliance to resist together in order to maintain balance. However, after a series of wars and setbacks, Volantis, ruled by the Elephant Party, became more cautious and did not launch large-scale foreign invasions for hundreds of years. But now, Gavin's act of destroying Lys broke the balance that had been maintained for 100 years, causing Volantis to once again think of seizing the disputed land. Myr and Tyrosh both elected merchants to govern, and their city-state armies consisted of a small number of slave soldiers and organized mercenary groups. This made their combat effectiveness largely depend on the hired mercenary groups. However, the characteristics of mercenaries themselves aroused suspicion and vigilance from the city-state rulers, and the mercenaries had no loyalty at all, so their combat effectiveness was greatly reduced. The difference is that the Tiger Cloak army of Volantis is composed of regular slave soldiers and is large in number. Compared with the Kingdom of the 3 Daughters, the Tiger Cloak army is loyal to the ruler of Volantis, and is more powerful in both equipment and combat effectiveness. Once Volantis decides to seize the disputed land, the first to bear the brunt of the impact will inevitably be Gavin, whose foundation is not yet solid. Moreover, Gavin couldn't help wondering whether Volantis had reached other agreements with Myr or Tyrosh. After all, both of them were once ruled by the Dragon King of Valyria. Now that Gavin had seized one of the 9 major trading cities, it must have aroused the vigilance of other city-states and their concerns about Gavin's rise. It was not impossible for them to put aside their hatred and unite their interests to face the outside world. Daenerys, who was standing by, looked at Gavin, who was lost in thought, and held his hand tightly. Gavin sensed something and turned his head to Daenerys, smiled slightly, patted her hand gently, and comforted her softly, "Don't worry, dear, the situation may not be as bad as you think. Let's make a decision after we arrive in Lys to check the specific situation. You go and arrange the itinerary. Let Brienne accompany you to Lys this time. I can feel more at ease with her protection." Daenerys nodded slightly and responded, "As long as you are by my side, I am not afraid of anything. I thought that if I took Brienne with me, it would take a month to reach Lys by boat." Gavin smiled and said, "It's okay. Chiaying is now strong enough to carry 3 or 4 people. We can ride the dragon and go much faster." After hearing this, Daenerys' eyes flashed with anticipation, and she said, "When can my Viceroy ride?" Viceroy, who was standing by, heard his name and looked at his master curiously. Gavin stroked Viserion's head and thought for a moment before saying, "It should be soon. The young dragon grows very fast. In another 6 months, I will be able to take you to the sky." After hearing this, Daenerys smiled and said, "Then I'll go tell Brienne to get ready." Gavin nodded with a smile, and then Daenerys turned and left, walking briskly to find her knight. Seeing this, Viceroy also broke free from Gavin and flew towards his master. Brienne stood in the open field, wearing solid armor and the famous Valyrian steel sword, Dark Sister, hanging at her waist. She looked up at the giant beast in front of her, and although it was not the first time she saw it, she still swallowed involuntarily. At this time, Jia Ying's body was huge and majestic, and its length had reached an astonishing 35 meters. Its golden scales shone brightly under the sunlight, and each scale was like a carefully crafted metal shield, tough and gorgeous. Jia Ying's body is strong and powerful, with clear muscle lines, as if it contains endless power. Its wings are broad and thick, and when spread out, they are like dark clouds covering the sky and the sun. The veins on them are clearly visible, demonstrating its powerful flying ability. Its sharp claws are like hooks, deeply embedded in the ground, as if it can set off a bloody storm with just a slight wave. Its head was huge and ferocious, with sharp fangs sticking out of its mouth, giving off a chilling aura. Its eyes were like burning fireballs, revealing majesty and violence that made people dare not look at it. Its tail was thick and slender, and when it swung, it brought gusts of wind, as if it could easily smash anything that blocked it. At this moment, Brienne no longer had the excitement she had just had yesterday when she learned that she could ride a dragon. Looking at such a majestic beast in front of her, she couldn't help but feel a lot of emotion in her heart. No wonder the Targaryen family was able to rule Westeros with the help of dragons. Anyone who saw such a huge creature up close would be filled with fear and awe. Moreover, dragons undoubtedly have absolute dominance on the battlefield. The flames they breathe out can instantly reduce the enemy to ashes. Their unparalleled power and majesty make everyone tremble. This dragon is not just a creature, but also a symbol of power and strength, which makes people deeply in awe. Just as Brienne was shocked, Gavin and Daenerys, fully equipped, were already walking towards her from a distance. Daenerys couldn't help laughing when she saw Brienne's expression, and Gavin saw the way Brienne looked at Blazing Shadow and smiled and reminded her, "Remember to fasten the chains that bind your body, and hold on to the dragon saddle tightly during takeoff and landing." Brienne respectfully saluted as a knight and said, "Thank you for your reminder, my lord. I will pay attention to it." Gavin nodded, then led the two men onto the dragon's back. As soon as Brienne stepped onto the dragon's back and sat down, Scorching Shadow, sensing something, felt uncomfortable. He turned his huge head to its back and stared straight at Brienne on it. Brienne turned her head to look at the Blazing Shadow, and was suddenly filled with fear. Cold sweat broke out all over her body, and her heart was in her throat. Gavin hurriedly stroked Jia Ying to comfort him, whispering in High Valyrian. After a long while, Jia Ying slowly turned his head under Gavin's comfort. Gavin saw this and then explained, "The dragon only recognizes one master. Only the master can ride on its back. Others must be brought on the dragon's back by the master to be accepted by the dragon." Then, without waiting for a reply, Gavin patted Jia Ying's neck. Jia Ying let out a loud dragon roar, suddenly spread his wings, and flapped them vigorously. A strong airflow swept around in an instant. As Jia Ying's body slowly rose into the air, the scenery below gradually became smaller. The three of them rode on Jia Ying and flew into the distance, leaving a cloud of dust behind them. Chapter 126. Little Rose's Sudden Visit. Just as Gavin flew away from the Stone Steps archipelago, a large warship flying a green-bottomed golden rose flag was slowly docking at the port of Bloodstone Island. The flag fluttered in the sea breeze, and the golden rose shone brightly. After the ship docked, several knights in fine armor walked down the warship steadily. Their armor shone brightly in the sunlight, and their steps were steady and powerful. When the officials at the port saw the flags and the knights disembarking, they hurried over at a trot, with respectful smiles on their faces, and asked about the other party's purpose. "I wonder what brings you, the lords of high court, to come from afar." At this time, a knight stood out from the crowd. He stood tall and spoke to the officials in a loud voice, "I am Fultimo Crane, the Master of Highgarden. I am here by order of Mace Tyrell, the Duke of Highgarden and the Warden of the South, to escort his daughter, Lady Marjorie Tyrell, to meet her guardian knight, Gawain Belleris. Please inform her. Before the official could reply, a noble girl walked down from the boat. Marjorie Tyrell has straight brown hair that falls down her back like a waterfall, shining with a healthy luster. Her delicate face is full of youthful vigor, and her bright big eyes are as bright as stars, revealing intelligence and agility. She was wearing a green long skirt, the hem of which fluttered gently in the wind, like the first green leaves in spring, fresh and moving. The skirt was embroidered with exquisite patterns, highlighting her noble status. After seeing Marjorie Tyrell, the official bowed and said respectfully, "I guess you are Miss Marjorie? Lord Gawain is not on Bloodstone Island at the moment. Please wait here for a moment. Let me report to Governor Boris now." Margaret smiled, and that smile was as warm and gentle as the spring sun. She said in a soft and sweet voice, "It's okay, I disturbed your work, so please help me inform you." The official respectfully said that this was the right thing to do and then hurried away. After the official left, Photomo Crane looked at Margaret and said with a worried look on his face, "Miss Margaret, I noticed that there are very few warships docked at the pier, and Gawain Belleris is not at Bloodstone Island at the moment. Is the rumor that they are attacking Rees true?" Margaret frowned slightly, thought for a moment and then said softly, "Don't guess, everything will be clear after meeting the governor of Bloodstone Island." Photomo Crane frowned and continued in a slightly anxious tone, "If Gawain really succeeds in conquering Lys, with his dragons and the Stepstone Islands fleet under his control, it won't be long before he is strong enough to dominate the Narrow Sea. By then, he will most likely sever his subordinate relationship with you and Highgarden." Marjorie smiled and said calmly, "I'm not worried about this at all. What I'm really worried about is the exiled princess of the Targaryen family. There was news that Gawain was planning to marry her. Sir Foltimore, please send someone to inquire here and make sure the news is true." Photomo Cleon nodded solemnly and replied, "Yes, miss. I will arrange it right away." Not long after, the governor of Bloodstone Island, Boris, came hurriedly, led by the official. He was tall, walked briskly, and had a warm smile on his face. After seeing Marjorie, he said, "Dear Miss Marjorie, I just received accurate information that Lord Gawain has left the Stone Islands and went to Rees to handle affairs." Marjorie said quickly, "Thank you for telling me, Governor. I heard that a war broke out between you and Lys. Do you need help from High Court?" Boris smiled and replied, "My lady, you are thoughtful. Lord Gawain has successfully conquered Lys. This time we are going back to stay there and stabilize the situation." Margaret was a little shocked when she heard this. She didn't expect Gawain to capture Rees so quickly. She asked hurriedly, "I wonder how long it will take Gawain to return to the stone steps. I want to see him." Boris thought for a moment and said, "I'm not sure about this. After all, Rees is in a bit of a mess right now because of the war. But don't worry, young lady. I've sent a message to Lord Gawain, and I'm sure he'll come back after receiving it. I've arranged a manor for you and your entourage by the sea, so you can wait here for a while and take a look at the scenery of the Stone Steps archipelago." Margaret smiled and said, "Thank you very much for your hospitality, Governor Boris. I'm sorry to bother you during this period of time." Boris quickly said, "It's my pleasure, miss. If you need anything, please let me know." After that, he waved to the waiter behind him, and the waiter came over with a plate of salt and bread according to tradition. Margaret and the others tore off a piece of bread, dipped it in the salt beside and ate it. In a manor by the sea, the sun shines on the lush garden, colorful flowers compete for splendor, the sea breeze blows gently, bringing bursts of salty and humid air. In the distance, the waves beat against the rocks, making crisp sounds, and the scenery is beautiful. High Court Master Foltimo Crane walked quickly into the manor garden with an envelope in his hand. He saw Margaret sitting with several maids in the garden, chatting and laughing. She was wearing a gorgeous dress and had a bright and charming smile. When Margaret saw Foltimo coming here, she said to the maids beside her, "You go down first." The maids stood up and saluted respectfully, then slowly retreated. Foltimo stepped forward, handed the envelope in his hand to Marjorie, and said, "Miss, this is the exact information I just found out. Gawain Belleris really intends to marry the exiled princess of the Targaryen family, and even clashed with King Robert on the Iron Throne for this. Moreover, the princess has a red baby dragon." Margaret took the envelope curiously, opened it and read it carefully. After a long while, she closed the letter and sighed, "It seems that the princess of the Long family has an unimaginable charm. Gavin is willing to duel with the king for her. Then he instructed Photomo beside him, Sir, prepare the ships for supplies and wait for another month. If there is no news from Gavin, I plan to go to Rees. After hearing this, Sir Photomo advised, Miss Margaret, even though the war has just ended, the sea over there is bound to be full of risks. We don't need to take such risks. We can just wait here. Margaret shook her head and said firmly, It's hard to say when Gavin Belleris will come back, so it's better for me to go there. I believe that Sir Photomo can protect me. After hearing this, Photomo immediately bowed and saluted solemnly, saying, Of course, young lady, I will definitely protect your safety. Chapter 127. New Three Cities Alliance. Under the blazing sun, a group of tall and strong soldiers held high the orange and black tiger flag and marched in the city of Mill in an orderly manner. The soldiers wore the iconic tiger skin robes and pointed helmets decorated with gorgeous feathers and metal ornaments, which shone brightly in the sun and looked majestic. They were the Tiger Robe Army from Volantis. The Tiger Robe soldiers were guarding the elephant in the middle of the team, with an exquisitely decorated sedan chair on its back. Sitting inside was Malakar Mijia, the Tiger Party governor of Volantis. Although the old man was old, his eyes were still sharp. His hair was grey and sparse, and his face was covered with wrinkles, like deep ravines carved by the years. However, his cold and arrogant expression and straight spine still revealed the majesty of his long-term high position. Listening to the noise outside, Malakar Mijia gently parted the curtain and looked out at the strange city. This was the first time in his life that he had come to Mir. If it weren't for the threat posed by the sudden appearance of the Dragon King and the cordial invitation of Lord Theron of Tyrosh, he would probably never have the chance to set foot in this familiar yet unfamiliar hostile city-state. Soon, the team arrived at the square in front of the governor's palace, where more than a dozen fat Mir governors dressed in gorgeous robes and a Tyroshi with colorful hair were waiting. A Mir governor came forward, bowed slightly, and said, Welcome to Mir, respected Governor Malakar. The council is ready. Lord Theron and the governors have already arrived and are waiting for you inside. Malakar nodded, and the slaves at the back of the team quickly ran to the elephant holding a red carpet and rolled it all the way to the governor's mansion. The elephant trainer then made the elephant kneel down, and the slaves nearby quickly knelt down to act as a step. Malakar then stood up and walked with steady steps, stepping off the elephant on the slave's back, walking on the red carpet towards the governor's palace. Led by the fat governor, Malakar walked into the huge conference hall. The hall was magnificent, with a huge triangular table occupying the center. The tabletop was made of precious wood and inlaid with dazzling gems and gold edges, showing its solemnity and luxury. Obviously, this table was used to hold the Three Cities Alliance when resisting Volantis. Now, it is unexpected that the Archon of Volantis sits on one of the sides. It is somewhat ironic and ridiculous. When Malakar came in, everyone in the hall stood up to greet him. On one side were the governors of Mir, wearing luxurious clothes and expensive accessories. They were fat and smiling, but their eyes were shrewd and calculating. On the other side were Lord Theron and other governors of Tyrosh. The Lord of Tyrosh wore a tall hat that represented power. He was tall, thin, with high cheekbones, and a pair of slender eyes deep in his eye sockets. His eyes were deep and sharp, revealing his viciousness and cunningness. The other governors of Tyrosh had colorful hair, which made them look flamboyant and unruly. Lord Theron spoke first, Welcome, respected Governor Malakar, thank you for taking the time to attend this meeting. Malakar sneered and said with a hint of disdain, Humph, if the situation was not so pressing, how could you have invited me here? After that, he walked straight to his seat and sat down. Hearing the contempt in Malakar's words, the hall was suddenly filled with a slight commotion. The merchant governors all felt dissatisfied and whispered to each other with gloomy faces. Lord Theron saw this and opened his hands and pressed them down, signaling for silence. Malakar Magir's attitude made him very angry, but he held back his anger. Unlike the kingdom of the three daughters, the governors of Volantis were always the families with Valyrian blood who took turns to inherit. They looked down on the merchants in the kingdom of the three daughters who were elected. However, the situation was urgent at this time, and as long as he could get the power of Volantis, a little humiliation was nothing. Then he said respectfully to Malakar, I believe you know all about Lys. Gavin Belleris attacked Lys in the Free Cities without any reason and occupied the entire territory at a very fast speed. Moreover, he is a Dragon King of Valyria. We all know the ambition of a Dragon King and he will never be satisfied with this. I believe that you, Archon Malakar, understand this truth when you come here. After hearing this, Malachar said disdainfully, "You are the ones who should be worried. The power of Volantis will never be afraid of the Dragon King. We have tens of thousands of tiger cloaks. Moreover, in the Bloody Age, we have killed more than one Dragon King with a giant dragon." A mere governor stood up and said eagerly, "Archon Malachar, we admit that Volantis is powerful. More than 100 years ago, Mir also killed Jacares Targaryen and his dragon. In the Bloody Age, Tyrosh did the same thing. This is nothing to brag about." Malachar leaned back in his chair and sneered, "If you are so familiar with killing dragons, why did you ask me to come here? Why would Volantis make an enemy of a Dragon King for no reason?" Lord Theron spoke up at this time, "Archon Malachar, we are all one of the 9 free trade cities. We should unite and drive out or kill the Dragon King Gavin Belaris. Otherwise, his ambitions will grow as he occupies the disputed lands. Sooner or later, he will threaten us. I am afraid that the powerful Volantis will not be spared by then. This is a lesson for us." After a pause, he continued, "After driving away the Dragon King, we, Tyrosh and Mir, have decided to give half of the disputed land that originally belonged to Lys to Volantis as a reward for your troops. In addition, we can also give you enough gold and supplies to satisfy you." Malachar said coldly, "Not enough. This price is not enough to make Volantis take action. Even if Gavin Belaris does not have enough troops to defend such a large area, he has a dragon and a fleet. The strength of that fleet is stronger than your 2 city-states combined." Following his words, the hall was instantly plunged into a noisy and heated discussion. The mere governors waved their arms angrily, loudly accusing the Malachar lion of asking too much, their faces flushed red, and their fat bodies trembled slightly with excitement. The governors of Tyrosh also frowned, exchanged worried glances with each other, and expressed their dissatisfaction with the harsh conditions proposed by Malachar. Lord Theron could only stand up again and wave his hands vigorously to quiet everyone down. "Be quiet, don't talk." Finally, everyone in the conference hall fell silent. Lord Theron asked Malachar with a serious expression, "What does the Archon want?" Chapter 128. Volantis Decision. Malachar Magir looked around at everyone. His mouth curled up, revealing a sly smile, his eyes flashing with shrewdness and greed. He slowly said, "In addition to the land, gold and supplies you just mentioned, I also want you, Tyrosh and Mir, to cede 2 towns in the disputed land respectively, and your maritime trade routes will be tax-free for 10 years. In addition, your army will fight together with my army of Volantis and must obey my command completely. Otherwise, there is no need to discuss anything." Malachar's words were like a bombshell, causing the hall to explode again. The mere governors were furious, and they quickly gathered together, their faces flushed, their eyes wide open, and they kept cursing Malachar. "Shit, this guy born of a bitch is so greedy." An obese governor of Mill gasped, with veins bulging on his forehead, and shouted loudly. "Greedy Volantens, they are never satisfied." Another mere governor waved his sturdy arms and spit flew. "We can hire more mercenaries. We don't need them at all. Why should we suffer this humiliation?" Another governor of Mill said with a face full of anger and gritted teeth. The governors of Tyrosh also expressed dissatisfaction with such harsh conditions. They all turned to look at their lord, Theron. Theron's face was so gloomy that it seemed as if water could drip out of it. His brows were tightly knitted together, and he fell into deep thought. His eyes moved back and forth between Malachar and his subordinates, weighing the pros and cons in his mind and thinking about countermeasures. Malachar Magir looked at the messy governors in the meeting hall and snorted in his heart. Even if they were in high positions, they could not change the greedy nature of these businessmen. Then he stood up and said loudly, "Governors of Mir and Lord Theron, you can discuss it carefully. I am not in a hurry. You can give me a reply at any time." After saying that, he ignored everyone and turned to walk out of the hall with steady steps, leaving the conference room without looking back. Upon seeing this, the tiger-robe soldiers immediately followed behind. They were in an orderly manner, and the collision of their armor made crisp sounds. Inside the conference hall, the mere governors and the people of Tyrosh looked at Malachar's departing back, anger and helplessness intertwined on their faces. Lord Theron took a deep breath, tried to calm himself, and said, "Everyone, calm down first, we must discuss a countermeasure." The discussion of the crowd sounded again, and the atmosphere in the hall was solemn and tense. In the evening, Lord Theron arrived at the residence of Malachar Magir. After the Tiger Cloak's almost humiliating search, Theron finally saw Malachar. He could only swallow his anger, bowed politely to Malachar, and said, Archon Malachar, we agree to Volantis' proposal. But we also have a request. Volantis must send a fleet to participate in the war, and in addition to the disputed land, they must also help us retake Lys Island. Malachar thought for a moment, then said, yes, but Volantis wants half of the Isle of Lys. Lord Theron gritted his teeth and said, okay, then let's do as you arrange. After hearing Theron's agreement, Malachar immediately said, since Mir and Tyrosh have agreed, gather your troops in the disputed land. Don't play tricks, Lord Theron. I also know how many troops you have. Theron nodded immediately and said, of course, I don't dare. Then I will go and inform the governors. Lord Theron then turned and left. He didn't want to stay here any longer. Malachar sat there with a barely perceptible smile on his face, as if he was proud of the outcome of the negotiation. Before setting out from Volantis, Malachar had discussed this with the other two archons of the Elephantine party. A dragon king has landed in the disputed land of Essos, which has posed a serious threat to Volantis. They must all take action, and it would be best if they could drive the dragon king out of Essos. It just so happened that Theron of Tyrosh sent an envoy, hoping to join Volantis in fighting against Gavin Bel-Eris. It would be good to share the pressure of Volantis. No matter what kind of reward Mir and Tyrosh were willing to give, Volantis would agree. The result of the negotiation has far exceeded the expectations of the Tiger Party, which advocates war. They know that this alliance will not only bring rich land and resources to Volantis, but also consolidate its position in the free trade city-state. In his mind, he has already begun planning the layout of the disputed areas in the future, so that the Tiger Party can usher in glory after this storm. The weather was fine, the sky was clear, and a few white clouds were floating leisurely in the clear, gem-like sky. A golden dragon spread its broad and powerful wings, like a giant stretching its arms, flying freely in the sky. Its body is agile and graceful. Every time it flaps its wings, it is like thunder, with an awe-inspiring majesty and power. The strong airflow whizzes past under its wings, as if playing a passionate war song. Gavin sat steadily on Chia Ying's back, holding the reins tightly with both hands, overlooking the camp below. The camp was densely packed with tents, and the flags fluttered in the wind. The soldiers shuttled back and forth in the camp, and their busy figures looked as small and chaotic as ants in his eyes. Gavin's eyes revealed worry and contemplation. Including the two camps he had seen before, a rough estimate showed that there were 20,000 Volantis tiger cloaks gathered in the borderland. 2 days ago, after Gavin returned to Lys and settled Daenerys, he hurriedly rode on the blazing shadow to scout the situation here. Combining the intelligence he had obtained before, he found that the situation in the disputed land was far worse than he had imagined. Not only did Volantis' 20,000 tiger cloak troops gather at the border in full battle readiness, but its Tiger Party Archon Malachar Mega also accepted the invitation of the Grand Lord of Tyrosh and went to Mir without stopping. In addition to the Golden Group, which Mir had always employed, Mir had even invited the Second Sons in Slavers Bay. Even Tyrosh had hired many pirates to join their fleet. Although those pirate ships were dilapidated and low, and some were even converted from merchant ships, they were numerous and docked outside the port of Tyrosh. Fortunately, the armies of Mir and Tyrosh have not taken any action for the time being. Calculating the time, Malachar Magir has just arrived in Mir, which means that Gavin still has some time to respond. Seeing that the situation was almost reconnaissance, Gavin immediately patted Jia Ying and flew towards Lys Island. He had to hurry up and make preparations in case the other party formed an alliance and surrounded him. Chapter 129, Power Shrinkage. After returning to Rhys, Gavin immediately released several ravens to the stepstones. He issued an order requiring Coburn to spare no effort in purchasing wildfire during this period, and to transport all the wildfire that had been accumulated before to Rhys as quickly as possible. Once Volantis successfully forms an alliance with Mir and Tyrosh, the strength they demonstrate in the disputed lands will give Gavin an overwhelming advantage. At that time, Gavin had no choice but to give up the disputed land and retreat back to the sea. By then, wildfire will become an important weapon to ensure naval combat advantages. Then, Gavin quickly called Hassan to learn about the details of reorganizing the prisoners and repairing the warships. After all, those naval prisoners were all experienced and skilled sailors. If they could be used for their own purposes, they would surely add a powerful force. Hassan explained seriously that after this period of reorganization, the naval prisoners are now familiar with the new warships and have gradually become accustomed to the various commands of Gavin's fleet. However, the problem is that the question of loyalty remains uncertain. Among those naval prisoners from Rees, some even had an irreconcilable blood feud with Gavin, and many of their relatives had died tragically in the previous unexpected sneak attack and fierce naval battle. Hassan had no choice but to disperse the enemy and assign them to different warships. In order to prevent any unexpected situations, only some of the prisoners who were not problematic were assigned. The number of people assigned to each warship was not large, just barely making up for the number of crew members lost in previous battle casualties. After hearing Hassan's explanation, Gavin pondered for a moment and said, "Publish a conscription notice in Lisboa, with experienced sailors given priority. Also, have Yora transport all the food, supplies and slaves from the disputed land back to Lisboa." Hassan was quite shocked when he heard Gavin's order. He asked doubtfully, "Sir, are you planning to retreat back to the sea?" Gavin sighed deeply and said, "We are just preparing for the worst. After all, it will be difficult for us to hold on to the disputed land with only 4,000 or 5,000 surrendered prisoners." After a pause, Gavin continued, "Our foundation is the fleet and the dragon. As long as we have absolute control of the sea, we can recover the lost land benefits from the sea." "Okay, go and do it quickly." Hassan immediately bowed and said, "Yes, sir, I will arrange it right away." Just after Hassan left quietly, one of Coben's apprentices gently opened the door and walked in. He bowed respectfully to Gavin, and then reported, "My lord, Governor Boris wrote to say that Marjorie Tyrell of the Tyrell family has arrived at Bloodstone Island and expressed her desire to see you. 2 days later, Quentin Martel, son of Prince Dorn Doran, will also come to Bloodstone Island and also hopes to meet you." After that, he handed the letter to Gavin respectfully. After Gavin took the letter, he began to read it carefully. After reading it, he put the letter down gently, and some doubts arose in his heart. How could Marjorie come to the Stepstone Islands so suddenly? For the current Tyrell family, they are afraid of trying every means to distance themselves from the thorn in the eyes of the Iron Throne, so how could they come to visit rashly? As for the purpose of Quentin Martel's visit, Gavin had no idea at all. He pondered for a moment, frowned slightly, and then wrote a reply letter. He said that he could not return to Bloodstone Island for the time being due to the tense war, asked the other party to wait for a while, expressed his apologies, and promised that Boris would entertain him well. Soon after the letter was written, it was handed to the maester with an order, "Send a raven to Bloodstone Island immediately to deliver this letter." The bachelor took the letter with both hands, bowed again, and then turned and left. As Gawain's order reached the disputed lands, Yoram Mormont immediately took action. He led the group of soldiers, like a raging torrent, and began to sweep through the towns and villages of the disputed lands. As time went by, the disputed land fell into chaos. Faced with the impending loss of wealth, many slave owners panicked. Some tried to resist Gavin's orders, but were knocked down and hung up by the soldiers. Some slave owners who resisted with force were even killed, and the disputed land was instantly shrouded in blood. Grain collected from various towns and villages was gathered together for transportation. Countless horse-drawn carriages were constantly moving, and slaves hurriedly carried bags of grain onto the carriages. Sweat flowed down their cheeks, but they didn't bother to wipe it off. Some grain bags were accidentally broken during transportation, and the golden wheat grains were scattered all over the ground, causing people to scramble for them. The soldiers shouted loudly to maintain order and directed the strong slaves to carry the precious gold, silver, and gems. The precious gold, silver, and gems were carefully packed into wooden boxes. All kinds of supplies were also loaded onto trucks and shipped to the port. Under the supervision of the soldiers, countless slaves moved towards the seaside. Meanwhile, Rees was also frantically busy. Gavin's fleet was overloaded, constantly traveling back and forth between the Rees Strait. The supplies and food at the port were piled up like mountains. As soon as the slaves got off the ship, they were driven to the island by the soldiers to free up the limited space on the dock. The slaves' eyes were full of fear and confusion. They were tied tightly with ropes, lined up in long rows, and slowly moved forward under the drive of the soldiers. The children were crying, the women looked ashen, and the men lowered their heads and walked heavily. From time to time, strong slaves were picked out by the soldiers to participate in the transportation. Daenerys stood on the wall, looking at the chaotic scene below, her eyes swept over the poor slaves. Suddenly, she noticed a thin little girl in the slave team below. Her face was haggard, her steps were weak, and she was obviously sick. The little girl's eyes were full of despair and helplessness, and her weak cry seemed to penetrate people's hearts. Daenerys' heart softened instantly. She quickly walked down the city wall and came to the marching team of slaves. The soldiers on the side came forward to drive them away, cursing. Brienne immediately drew her sword and stood in front of Daenerys. Seeing this, the angry soldier was about to draw his sword, but the accompanying official immediately stepped forward to explain Daenerys's identity. After hearing this, the soldiers immediately stepped back respectfully, and the marching team was forced to stop. Daenerys walked over to the little girl, untied the ropes that bound her, and gently touched her hair. Then Daenerys ordered her to be brought back and someone to take good care of the little girl. The entire disputed land fell into unprecedented chaos, and in this chaos, Jorah Mormont firmly carried out Gawain's orders and transported everything that could be taken away to the Isle of Lys. Chapter 130. The First Legion. Seeing the previous scene, Daenerys walked towards her residence anxiously. When she learned that Gavin was in the military camp, she turned around without hesitation and walked quickly towards the direction of the camp. The sun shone on the land of the military camp, and the raised dust danced in the golden light. When Gavin saw Daenerys, who had suddenly arrived, before he even asked her purpose, she couldn't wait to tell him about the miserable scenes of the slaves she had seen before. Those pairs of eyes full of desire and helplessness deeply hurt her heart. She said with a burning gaze and full of expectation, "Gavin, we must give these slaves freedom. Look at them, living an inhuman life and suffering endless torture, how can we just sit back and watch?" Gavin frowned slightly, his eyes deep, and after thinking for a moment, he responded, "In fact, I have had this idea for a long time. The slaves lack enthusiasm and have low production efficiency. Slavery has seriously restricted the development of the territory. This is extremely detrimental to our future. However, abolishing slavery rashly will definitely cause chaos. I originally planned to set up various industries for slaves to work according to the model of the Stone Steps Islands. Any slave can be freed after working for 5 years, and those with good performance can shorten the years. But now that slaves are migrating on a large scale, people's hearts are floating. It is indeed necessary to announce this news as soon as possible to calm people's hearts." After hearing this, Daenerys' face instantly broke into a happy smile, and she said excitedly, "Then let me do it. I want them to know that there will be hope in their lives soon." Looking at Daenerys' enthusiastic face, Gavin couldn't help but think of Daenerys' kindness when he watched the drama in his previous life. She even paid a lot for it. But now that he was in control of the situation, he could satisfy her kindness. Thinking of this, Gavin nodded and said, "Okay, then you go and arrange it, but be careful with your wording. Make sure everyone understands that this is the Lord's gift." Daenerys was overjoyed when she heard this. She turned around and left quickly like a light bird, eager to bring this ray of hope to the suffering slaves. Daenerys traveled to several slave settlements, constantly announcing the policy of freedom to the slaves and ordering the soldiers to uncuff all the slaves. The slaves were silent at first, as if they couldn't believe their ears. But soon, their disbelief turned into extreme surprise and excitement, and deafening cheers broke out in the crowd. Some of them cried with joy, tears streaming down their cheeks, some hugged each other and cheered, some knelt down to thank, muttering praises to Daenerys and Gavin. As Daenerys made her final announcement, an elderly slave stepped forward, holding the heavy shackles that had just been unlocked in both hands, respectfully presented them to Daenerys, and shouted loudly, "You and Lord Gavin are our saviors, the breakers of shackles." Everyone responded and shouted in unison, "Breakers of shackles! Breakers of shackles!" In this enthusiastic atmosphere, some soldiers came hurriedly and announced loudly in the crowd, "Anyone who volunteers to join the army can gain freedom in just 3 years. The wives, children, and daughters of the soldiers can also enjoy the 3-year policy. Those who have made military achievements can directly exchange their military merits for freedom and are more likely to become officers. Their children will be recruited to the academy for training." This news was like pouring another bucket of oil on the burning flames, and the enthusiasm of the slaves was instantly ignited to the extreme. Many young and strong men stepped forward, with flames burning in their eyes, and walked out of the crowd to sign up without hesitation. Among them, a tall, muscular young man, who originally looked a little haggard due to long-term slavery, was full of high morale at the moment and shouted loudly, "I want to join the army and fight for freedom." His voice echoed in the crowd, arousing more people's response. A thin but determined boy also squeezed to the front. Although his body was not fully grown, he had the courage and shouted in a slightly childish voice, "I want to go too, I want to use my strength to exchange for true freedom." A middle-aged slave with a weathered face, his face engraved with the traces of time and the pain of slavery, stood up resolutely at this moment, although I am no longer young, I still have the strength to fight for freedom. His words infected the people around him, and more people expressed their willingness to join the army. For a time, the voices of signing up to join the army rose one after another and resounded through the sky. As the last batch of supplies and slaves were transported to the island of Lys, the chaotic docks gradually returned to order. The noisy shouts gradually subsided, the crowds pushing and scrambling also slowly stopped, and the chaos finally receded like a tide. Although the slaves were very enthusiastic about joining the army, only 5,000 people were selected after a strict screening. Most of them were new recruits with no combat experience, and their immature faces were full of confusion and expectations for the future. Due to the lack of training and actual combat experience, it was difficult to form a strong combat force in a short period of time. Gavin looked at the 5,000 new recruits. He decided to train them first and only have them participate in the task of defending the city. Since this was Gavin's first real army, he named them the First Legion. Just then, Hassan came hurriedly and told Gavin that the envoy of Volantis had arrived at Lys Island and wanted to see him. The other party claimed that he came under the orders of the Archon of Volantis, Malakar Mijia. In a spacious hall, Gavin sat on a heavy wooden chair in the middle with Jorah and Hassan sitting on his left and right. The hall was extremely quiet, like the calm sea before a storm. Outside the hall, the breeze gently blew the military flag, which swayed slightly, making a slight rubbing sound. Soon, Volantis's messenger and his followers, led by the guards, strode into the hall. He held his head high, walked steadily and powerfully, and wore a gorgeous and exquisite silk robe embroidered with Volantis' unique and complex patterns. The gold thread shone brightly in the sun, highlighting his noble status. He had an elusive expression on his face, and his eyes were as sharp as a hawk, examining Gavin up and down, as if he wanted to see through his mind. Gavin narrowed his eyes slightly and looked at the uninvited guest calmly. The envoy bowed slightly as a courtesy, his gesture seemed respectful but a little perfunctory. Then he straightened his back, cleared his throat, and said in a low and penetrating voice, "Respected Dragon King Gavin, I am here on behalf of Volantis, Mir, and Tyrosh by the order of Archon Malakar Mijia, who is in charge of the three-city coalition forces at this time." Chapter 131. The threat from 3 cities. Gavin nodded slightly, his expression unchanged, and asked calmly, "Just tell me, why did Malakar ask you to come here?" The messenger coughed lightly, his eyes became sharper, and he continued, "I have heard about your actions in this land. Volantis, Mir, and Tyrosh are very concerned about it. The land you occupy now, including some disputed lands and the Isle of Lys, should not be under your control. I am ordered to come here and demand that you withdraw immediately and return all the wealth you have taken from here. Otherwise, what awaits you will be a ruthless war, and you and your dragon may die here." As soon as the messenger finished speaking, the atmosphere in the hall suddenly became tense, as if an invisible contest had already begun. The air around them seemed to condense, and the silence was so frightening. Gavin's eyes turned cold in an instant, like frost in the cold winter. He slowly said, "So, Volantis is planning to interfere in the affairs between me and the Kingdom of 3 Daughters? I advise Volantis to think carefully and not become the next Rhys." His voice was steady and powerful, but it carried an invisible pressure. As soon as Gavin said this, the messenger's face instantly turned gloomy, like the dark clouds before a storm. He snorted coldly and said, "I remind you, Dragon King Gavin, be careful with your words. The power of Volantis is beyond your imagination. The dragons that died in Volantis are much bigger than your dragons. Currently, the coalition forces of the 3 cities exceed 50,000, and there are more than 200 warships in total. Your small force is like a baby facing a strong man in front of us, and can be easily torn apart." His words were full of threats and arrogance. Gavin stood up suddenly, supported his hands on the table in front of him, leaned forward, glared and said, "Since you call me the Dragon King, but you still threaten me. Messenger, please tell me what the consequences would be if you threatened a Dragon King in the ancient Valeria. I believe that you, who are from Volantis, can explain it to me." His anger erupted like a volcano, and his whole body exuded a terrifying aura. The messenger was frightened by Gavin's momentum and his face turned pale in an instant, but he still pretended to be calm and said, "Valeria was destroyed in the doomsday catastrophe long ago. You are seeking your own death. Once the coalition army approaches, you will be powerless to fight back." However, his trembling voice betrayed his inner fear. Gavin straightened his back, his eyes firm as iron, and responded loudly, Valeria has indeed been destroyed long ago, but the Dragon King of Valeria is still there. Since you can't answer, I can only demonstrate it to you with my actions." His words were loud and clear, full of determination. Hiss! As Gavin finished speaking, a deafening dragon roar came from outside the hall, and blazing shadow squeezed through the door and slowly crawled into the hall. Its huge and majestic body filled the entire space, and its huge head slowly approached the frightened messenger, and then let out a huge roar. The sound waves echoed in the hall, as if to shatter everything. The messenger shouted at Gavin in horror, "No, you can't do this, I am a messenger from Volantis. You can't kill the messenger." His voice became sharp and piercing because of extreme fear, and his body trembled involuntarily, as if sifting chaff. Gavin looked at the shouting messenger calmly without responding, but looked at Jiaying. "Dracarys." Hearing Gavin's order, the messenger was the first to react. He looked at Gavin in disbelief and shouted in despair, "You will regret your decision." However, before he finished speaking, blazing dragon flames spewed out of Jiaying's mouth. Then his body was covered by dragon flames and turned into a burning fireball in an instant. Under the baptism of dragon flame, he could not even utter a wail before he turned into a human-shaped charcoal. The air was filled with a pungent smell of burning. At this moment, the atmosphere in the hall was extremely tense, as if a spark could cause a huge explosion. Everyone's heartbeat was like a war drum, and their breathing became rapid and heavy. Gavin looked at the attendant who came with the messenger, and the other party immediately knelt down and begged for mercy. "Lord Dragon King, this is none of my business. I am not disrespectful to you. I am just a follower. Lord Dragon King, please spare my life." His voice was filled with tears, his forehead was pressed tightly against the ground, and his body kept shaking. Gavin looked at his follower who was so frightened that he was already incoherent, and said expressionlessly, "Tell him to clean up the dust on the ground and take it back to Malachar. This is my reply." Then he turned and left, leaving a dead silent hall. Gavin returned to his study and poured himself a glass of wine, then drank it in one gulp. The wine slid down his throat, but it could not calm his worries. The worst situation has indeed happened. Volantis, Mir, and Tyrosh have formed an alliance. Now the enemy can pose a certain threat to Gavin by relying on the advantage of the number of warships at sea. He leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes, and quietly thought about the strategy to deal with the threat. The candle light swayed on his face, reflecting his frown and determined outline. After a long while, Gavin opened his eyes, revealing a trace of solemnity. The enemy had too many warships. Even though most of his fleet was made up of high-performance sailing warships, his chances of winning were slim in a head-on confrontation. Fortunately, Volantis' fleet had not yet been dispatched, and it would take at least half a month for the enemy to reach Lys. Before that, Gavin could completely adopt the tactic of dividing and annihilating. He planned to first concentrate the superior strength of the fleet to destroy the fleets of Mir and Tyrosh. Once successful, he would wait for the arrival of the fleet of Volantis and engage in a duel. After the victory of the naval battle, the three cities that lost their fleets could only sigh at the sea. By then, Gavin, who has high mobility at sea, will have absolute initiative. Not to mention the coalition forces with 50,000 troops, even 500,000 troops will find it difficult to defend the long coastline. You know, Volantis and Mir are both coastal cities, and Tyrosh is an isolated island. Faced with Gavin who can attack the city at any time, the opponent will inevitably choose to split up their troops to defend. Once the troops are divided, this seemingly powerful so-called alliance will be in name only. Gavin knew very well that he had only half a month of time. Moreover, once the fleet was fully deployed, Lys Island would lose the protection of the fleet and could only rely on the forces on the shore for defense. The only one he could rely on was the newly formed First Legion. As for the surrendered soldiers and mercenaries under Yura, Gavin would never dare to employ them. Moreover, the originally planned wildfire tactics were also declared invalid because the wildfire failed to arrive in Lys in time. The fleet must rely on real hard power to annihilate the fleets of the two cities without suffering too much loss, otherwise it may not be able to win the subsequent decisive battle with Volantis. Chapter 132. Attack. The night enveloped Rees Island like a thick piece of black silk. Even the stars seemed to be hidden behind it, appearing particularly dim. The hall in the governor's mansion was lit with flickering candles. Gavin and Daenerys sat at the front, and the others sat on both sides. Gavin informed everyone of his plan to use the time difference to divide and annihilate the coalition fleet, and then began to make arrangements for everyone. He first looked at Hassan and asked, "How is the training of the newly recruited crew members going? Has the fleet's crew been completed?" Hassan immediately reported, "Sir, the fleet's crew has been basically replenished during this period. Since all the recruits are experienced, they can get started as long as they are familiar with the command." Gavin nodded slightly and said, "Tomorrow morning, all fleets will assemble and head for Mir and Tyrosh." Then he turned his eyes to Yora and said, "Take all your men with you and follow the fleet." After hearing this, the two looked at each other and stood up to accept the order. Gavin looked at Daenerys and said, "While I'm away, Lys will be handed over to you." Then he looked at Brienne behind her and said solemnly, "Knight Brienne, I will hand over the First Legion to you for command. I believe you will protect Lys and Daenerys." Brienne didn't expect Gavin to trust her so much that he actually gave her the army to command. She immediately knelt on one knee, put her right fist on her chest, and said solemnly, "I swear on my life, even if I shed my last drop of blood, I will protect the lives of Lys and my lady." After the meeting, the night deepened and in the harbour, the outlines of warships were looming in the moonlight. In the faint light of dawn, the port of Lys Island was filled with bustle and noise. Countless amounts of food, supplies, and arrows were continuously transported to the ship. The warships were lined up in an orderly manner in the harbour, their sails fluttering in the wind, like ferocious beasts ready to attack. Soldiers were busy and nervously shuttling back and forth on the deck, their shouts and footsteps blending together to compose an exciting battle prelude. Warships kept sailing out of the port and heading towards the distant sea, and then gradually gathered there, forming a shocking scene. After bidding his final farewell to Daenerys, Gavin turned and boarded the warship. With his order, the horn of departure sounded, and Bellery slowly sailed out of the port and headed towards Tyrosh with the fleet. While Gavin's fleet was sailing, Malachar also received the ashes brought back by the attendant. After the attendant's horrified narration, his face instantly turned ashen, veins bulged on his forehead, and his eyes almost spewed fire. "Damn Gavin Belleris! How dare he humiliate me and challenge the majesty of Volantis!" he roared, his voice echoing in the tent, shaking the slaves around him. He suddenly threw the crystal wine glass in his hand to the ground, and the fragments flew everywhere. "Gather all troops and march to the disputed land immediately. I will make Gavin pay for his arrogance." Malachar's voice was full of determination and murderous intent. The generals looked at each other in bewilderment, but under Malachar's rage, no one dared to hesitate for a moment, and they all followed his orders and left. At this time, the Sea of Tyrosh was busy and chaotic. Due to the large-scale recruitment of pirates, the number of warships increased dramatically, and the port could not accommodate them at all. Most of the pirate ships could only stay on the vast sea and could not enter the port for rest. However, with the support of the Grand Lord of Tyroshi, the pirates were able to enjoy a comfortable life during this period. Every day, the Grand Lord sent supply ships to deliver sufficient food and charming prostitutes on time. At this time, the pirates seemed bored on the ship. They were basking in the sun, and some were even fishing leisurely, as if they were enjoying a rare and pleasant time. At this time, a tiny black spot appeared in the sky. Since seabirds often flew over this area, the pirates did not pay attention to it at first and continued to be busy with their own affairs. However, until the black spot grew bigger and bigger, it attracted the attention of some pirates. "What is that?" a pirate asked in confusion. "It should be a seabird, but it's rare to see one that big," another pirate guessed casually. "That's a dragon." Finally, a sharp-eyed pirate shouted in horror. "Enemy attack!" With this shout, the originally relaxed and leisurely atmosphere was instantly broken. "The dragon is coming, ring the bell." Panic voices came one after another. Some pirates finally saw the golden dragon swooping down at high speed and quickly rang the alarm bell. Along with the bell of enemy attack, countless pirates who were previously leisurely panicked and the ship was in chaos. Several captains who happened to be on the deck were the first to react. When they saw the giant dragon flying in the sky, they immediately issued a series of orders to the panicked pirates around them. "Quickly deploy the dragon hunting crossbow. Raise the sails. Return to your posts and do not panic." The pirates hurriedly tore off the oil paper covering the dragon hunting crossbow and began emergency debugging. However, before they could install the crossbow, the extremely fast golden dragon had already rushed to them. Dracarys with a roar, the hot and violent dragon flames with huge impact force instantly swept across the deck of a pirate ship. The dragon hunting crossbow that had just been wound up was instantly burned, and the pirates who had no time to escape rolled in pain in the dragon flames, emitting bursts of heart-wrenching wails. Even the solid deck could not withstand the huge impact of the dragon flames and began to break. The flames rushed into the cabin, burning everything mercilessly. The tall sails were also ignited by the dragon flames. The pirate ship completely lost power and could only stay where it was, desperately waiting to be turned into ashes. The dragon flame did not stop, but was carried by the golden dragon to fly towards the next pirate ship. In just a short moment, it successfully destroyed 3 pirate ships. Preparation. Put. At this moment, some pirates who had reacted immediately used bows and arrows to shoot arrows at the golden dragon, hoping to kill the dragon rider on the dragon's back. Seeing this, Gavin, who was highly focused, immediately raised the shield he had prepared in advance for protection. A dull sound was heard, and soon Gavin's shield turned into a hedgehog. Some arrows that avoided the shield were successfully blocked by Gavin's sturdy armor. As the rain of arrows fell, there was a dense sound of metal clashing from Jia Ying's body. Countless arrows fell on its back, but they could not break its hard scales. Feeling offended, Jia Ying immediately fought back with dragon flame, but the rain of arrows came from all directions, and its dragon flame could only suppress some of the pirates. Chapter 133. Arrival at Tyrosh. It was not until Jia Ying's dragon flame destroyed 7 pirate ships that some of the dragon hunting crossbows began to fire. With a sharp sound of breaking through the air, a huge crossbow arrow like a spear whistled and was nimbly avoided by Jia Ying. Seeing that the enemy had fully reacted, Gavin immediately ordered Jia Ying to take off, and Jia Ying immediately waved his huge wings and flew away from the warship below. From high in the sky, Gavin looked down at the pirates who were already on high alert, and knew in his heart that today's sneak attack was over. The result of burning 7 pirate ships had exceeded the initial expectations. He originally planned to attack the Tyrosh fleet directly, but after some reconnaissance, he found that the enemy was extremely well prepared. The enemy had docked the fleet neatly at the port, and some warships had even loaded their dragon hunting crossbows in advance, and the dragon hunting crossbows on the shore were always aiming at the sky. Gavin, who wanted to play it safe, could only choose to attack the pirate ships that stayed at sea. As he expected, without the support of the fleet, it would be very easy for the enemy to focus fire on them if they attacked with dragons alone. Unless there were a large number of dragons, it would be difficult to suppress the large number of dragon hunting crossbows. If Jia Ying used the bath of fire, he could forcibly attack the fleet in the port, but that would consume too much of Jia Ying, and Gavin had to ensure that Jia Ying could use the bath of fire to heal when he was injured, so he couldn't use it easily. Gavin commanded the blazing shadow to circle in the air continuously until he was sure there was no chance of attack, and then he chose to evacuate. At this time, Gavin's fleet would still take 2 days to reach Tyrosh. He planned to launch sneak attacks from time to time during these 2 days to make the enemy too busy to deal with them, thereby achieving the goal of undermining the enemy's morale. It would be even better if he could scare off the pirates. Jia Ying landed on a deserted island not far from Tyrosh. Gavin jumped off the dragon's back, and after a brief observation of the surrounding environment, he let Jia Ying go to the sea to find food. He lit a bonfire and took some food out of his pack, planning to eat something and rest before making plans for the night. On the sea ravaged by the dragon flames, the surviving pirates fell into deep fear and worry. Their eyes were filled with terror, their bodies trembled, as if their souls were burned by the terrifying dragon flames. A young pirate sat slumped on a burnt deck, his dull eyes filled with despair and helplessness. The pirate ship he was on was burned and he was the only one who was lucky enough to escape, but because everyone was so nervous, no one rescued him. Seeing the dragon flying away, a pirate crossbowman tried to loosen the string of the dragon hunting crossbow, but was stopped by other pirates. The huge figure of the dragon and the deadly dragon flame brought them deep fear. They were worried that they would be attacked by the dragon again, and the 2 sides argued for a while. It was not until the captain came here that the crossbow strings were loosened at his order. He explained to the pirates, keeping the string wound for a long time will damage the dragon hunting crossbow, and it will be more difficult to deal with the dragon's attack. We can only wind the string after we see the dragon. Everyone better cheer up. Although the pirates understood that the captain was right, they still couldn't help but worry as they watched the crossbow strings gradually loosen. An atmosphere of fear began to spread among them. In the palace of Tyrosh, Lord Theron curled his lips indifferently when he learned that the pirate ship was attacked by a dragon. He sat on the luxurious throne, even with a smug smile on his face, secretly congratulating himself for his wise arrangement. Humph, those greedy pirates are just a bunch of rabble. Fortunately, I docked my fleet at the port, otherwise it would be my precious fleet that was attacked. Lord Theron then ordered his attendants, "Give those greedy pirates some more money and women, that will be enough to appease them." His tone was full of contempt, and he showed no sympathy for the casualties of the pirates. When the night completely enveloped Tyrosh, Gavin flew into the dark sky on the blazing shadow. The dark night was like a huge black silk, tightly wrapping the entire city. With the cover of night, the blazing shadow's agile figure approached the port quietly like a ghost. Tyrosh was covered with dark clouds at this time. The thick clouds blocked the moonlight and plunged the earth into darkness. But the port was still brightly lit and bustling, with noisy voices and the collision of ships intertwined. The blazing shadow was not flying high, and the breeze brought by its huge wings did not attract any attention from below. After carefully observing for a while, Gavin decided to take a risk, and his eyes quickly locked on a conspicuous sailing warship. "Chia-ying, dive!" Gavin's calm voice sounded. Chia-ying received the order and began to dive at high speed like a black lightning. In just a moment, he flew over the sailing warship, spewing surging dragon flames from his mouth. The scorching flames seemed to come from hell, instantly setting the sailing warship on fire. The flames on the warship spread rapidly in the night wind. The orange-red flames jumped, illuminating a large area of the sea and dispelling the surrounding darkness. At this time, the soldiers on duty at the port finally reacted. They panicked and hurriedly rang the alarm bell. The rapid bells echoed over the port. However, when the Tyrosh fleet reacted, the blazing shadow had already flapped its huge wings and rushed into the sky with Gavin. The wind whistled in his ears, and Gavin's hair was blown into a mess. In the air, Gavin turned his target to the pirate ships on the sea. The sea was dark and bottomless at night, and the pirate ships with lights on became the most eye-catching targets. The dragon flames swept down again, and one pirate ship after another was engulfed by the flames. The panicked pirates fled in the flames, and their shouts and cries for help echoed on the sea. Their faces were full of fear and despair, as if the end of the world had come. When the pirates finally prepared the dragon hunting crossbow, they found that it was extremely difficult to lock onto the high-speed flying dragon under the cover of night. The dragon's figure appeared and disappeared in the darkness, as elusive as a ghost. It was not until the fire illuminated half of the sky and the entire sea surface was illuminated as bright as day that Gavin and Chia-ying evacuated to ensure safety. Gavin wasn't sure how many pirate ships were burned in the night raid, but looking at the exhausted blazing shadow from the excessive dragon flame spitting, its heavy breathing and slightly trembling wings, Gavin felt that the results of this trip should be very fruitful. The dragon's non-stop attacks lasted for 2 days. Each time it struck and left, mercilessly burning a large number of warships. The dragon's attack did not stop until noon of the third day, when Gavin's fleet was about to arrive at Tyrosh. At this moment, there were no complete warships on the Sea of Tyroshi. Only the wreckage of pirate ships and tattered flags were floating on the sea, making it look a mess. Chapter 134, Annihilation Part. Some pirates had already chosen to leave because they could not bear the pressure, and the remaining pirate ships finally sailed into the ports that were forced to vacate, looking as miserable as dogs that had lost their homes. The fleet stopped at a deserted island not far from Tyrosh. Including the longships that had been captured and returned, the fleet now had 113 warships, nearly half of which were tall sailing warships, moored on the sea in a black mass. The fleet, including the surrendered soldiers led by Yura, had a total of people. At this time on the Bel Aris, all the captains and officers of the fleet gathered on the wide deck, and everyone surrounded a huge and detailed map of the island. Gavin held the dawn in his hand and pointed it at a bay southwest of Tyrosh. He said loudly, "The Tyrosh fleet and the remaining pirates are now hiding in this port. Thanks to the attacks in the past few days, the enemy has less than 50 warships left, and no warship dared to leave the port in the past few days. It is obvious that Tyrosh is still unaware of the arrival of our fleet." Then, Gavin's dawn moved along the map and continued to introduce the specific situation of the enemy's coastal defense. The Tyrosh fleet is now huddled in the port, and they are undoubtedly a group of sitting ducks. I plan to make full use of our advantage in the range of our crossbows to block all the enemy warships in the port and then sink them all. The only trouble is that we are close to the enemy's coast during the attack, which means that the warships participating in the attack will be within the range of the catapults on the shore. Therefore, I plan to launch a night attack to suppress the enemy's field of vision as much as possible, so that their catapults cannot make effective attacks. After explaining the battle plan, Gavin looked around at everyone with a sharp gaze. His majestic eyes seemed to be able to see through everyone's mind. Then he solemnly instructed Yura, "Yura, once we completely destroy the Tyrosh fleet, you must bring your people to quickly land in the disputed land controlled by the enemy. After that, plunder all the coastal towns and villages, bring back all the food and slaves, especially the craftsmen in the shipyards. Don't leave any behind. Bring them all back. Burn all the shipbuilding wood that cannot be taken away. I will leave you enough warships at that time. After the operation, head to Milbay. After hearing this, Jiao La bowed and said, "Yes, sir." After the meeting, the entire fleet immediately entered a tense and busy state. Soldiers performed their duties and made preparations for the war in an orderly manner. They carefully checked the bowstrings of the crossbows to ensure that they were tough and powerful. The huge and heavy crossbow arrows were carefully carried out and neatly arranged aside. Everyone looked solemn, silently waiting for the night to fall in a tense atmosphere. The night was as dark as thick ink. In this quiet and oppressive night, the fleet quietly and slowly moved towards the port of Tyrosh. The blazing shadow hovered over the fleet, and Gavin stood steadily on the bow. This time he did not ride the blazing shadow. With the mental connection with the blazing shadow, he was able to remotely control the dragon. With the cover of the fleet, Gavin planned to let the blazing shadow bath of fire forcibly attack the warships in the port at the critical moment. After all, it was too dangerous to ride it personally. The gentle sea breeze blew slowly, but it failed to relax everyone's tense nerves. The fleet gradually approached its destination, and the outline of Tyrosh port was faintly visible under the moonlight. "Crossbows, prepare to fire!" Gavin ordered decisively in a low voice. The soldiers moved quickly, the heavy crossbows were accurately adjusted to the appropriate direction, and the huge crossbow arrows were placed steadily and strung ready to be fired. As the fleet entered the attack range, the guards at the port of Tyroshi finally spotted the flickering lights on the sea, and they immediately sounded the alarm in panic. "Enemy attack!" Clang clang clang. As the sharp alarm sounded, the port was instantly brightly lit. The bright lights shone on the warships docked in the port, making the target appear clearer and more obvious. Gavin waved his hand violently and shouted loudly, "Fire!" In an instant, countless huge crossbow arrows as big as spears were like black lightning, tearing through the night sky with the force of thunder and rushing towards the enemy ships in the harbour. The dull sound of collision and the crisp sound of wood breaking were particularly harsh in the silent night. The enemies who had not had time to react were instantly torn to pieces by the crossbow arrows. The oil lamp of an enemy ship was knocked out by the speeding crossbow arrows, and the flames quickly ignited the cables and spread to the sails at an alarming speed. The orange-yellow flames illuminated the vast sea around. Several tall sailing warships received special attention. Their wooden hulls instantly became riddled with holes, and even the seriously damaged warships began to take in water and tilt, as if they were about to sink. After the first round of shooting, the soldiers quickly and skillfully turned the crossbow strings, placed the crossbow arrows, and nervously prepared for the second round of shooting. As the second round of crossbow arrows were fired, the enemy's catapults and crossbow cannons also began a fierce counterattack. However, due to the cover of night, they could only vaguely see the faint lights on the sea and could not accurately judge the distance. Most of the attacks fell on the open sea. Only a few huge rocks thrown by catapults fell on the water near the fleet, splashing huge water, but did not cause any substantial damage to the warships. After several rounds of shooting between the two sides, Gavin used his keen judgment to accurately determine the position of the catapult, and he immediately called out to Jiaying anxiously in his heart. "Hiss!" Feeling Gavin's call, Jiaying immediately turned around and swooped down towards the catapult. As the altitude dropped rapidly, the enemy who had been prepared also discovered the dragon galloping down. "Here comes the dragon! Hurry up and aim the dragon hunting crossbow at the sky!" Countless crossbow arrows were fired at the swooping Jiaying with a sharp sound. Jiaying immediately accelerated and successfully dodged most of the crossbow arrows. He flew towards the catapult below, and then Jiaying fiercely blew out a mouthful of dragon flame. The catapult and the surrounding soldiers were instantly baptized by the blazing dragon flame and turned into ashes. After destroying the catapult, Jiaying took off again and flew towards the next target. The commander of Tyrosh looked at the destroyed catapults and immediately guessed the dragon's target, and hurriedly ordered the dragon hunting crossbows to protect the sky above the catapults. Sure enough, the dragon once again broke out of the cover of the night and rushed towards a catapult, and countless dragon hunting crossbows immediately shot at the rapidly descending blazing shadow. Although darkness was not conducive to the soldiers operating the dragon hunting crossbow, it was also not conducive to Jiaying's evasion. Facing the dense crossbow arrows, Jiaying tried his best to dodge, but unfortunately he was hit by a crossbow arrow. Chapter 135, Annihilation. Ding! With a crisp sound of metal colliding, the crossbow arrow was bounced away by the high-speed moving Jiaying. The scales on the injured part of the dragon were shattered, and a hideous blood hole appeared on its body. The hot dragon blood kept flowing out, and the pain made it roar angrily. It immediately fell to the ground and began to madly spit dragon flames all around. The nearby buildings were instantly destroyed by the dragon flames. Some soldiers who were closer had to crawl to escape from the violent dragon. Obviously, the Tairoji side did not expect that the dragon would attack them on the ground. Most of the dragon hunting crossbows were blocked by buildings, but some of them still successfully hit the blazing shadow, but they did not hit the vital points. The pain caused by countless attacks made Jiaying angry and irritated. It relied on its strong defense to take off again. As soon as it took off, countless crossbows attacked. Gavin sensed Jiaying's condition and immediately ordered it to use fire bath. The temperature around the blazing shadow rose rapidly, and there was a faint glow of fire in the gaps between its scales. Several wounds on its body directly sprayed out blazing flames. Soon, its flesh and blood turned into flames at a speed visible to the naked eye. The crossbow arrows piercing its body were melted by the high temperature, and some of the crossbow arrows shot at it also instantly turned into molten iron. A dragon-shaped flame flew at high speed towards the warships in the harbor at a low altitude, and everything along the way was mercilessly ignited. Some soldiers who saw such a miracle could not help but kneel down and pray to the gods, thinking that they had angered the gods, and even stopped the attack of the dragon-hunting crossbows. The flames formed by the blazing shadow kept hitting the warships docked at the port, and after igniting more than 10 ships in a row, it stopped due to the intense consumption of magic power. The dragon-shaped flame immediately flew towards Gavin and turned into flesh and blood again on the way. When the blazing shadow flew back to the sky above the Belarus, all the injuries it had suffered before had disappeared. Blazing Shadow staggered onto the Belarus, then collapsed on the deck, gasping for breath, his huge wings trembling slightly, obviously no longer able to fly. Seeing this, Gavin ordered the Belarus to retreat without hesitation to prevent the Blazing Shadow from being hit by the boulders thrown by the enemy. Even though there were only a few boulders thrown at this time, the attack just now was already a bit risky. Gavin knew that even if he lost all his fleets, he would never lose the Blazing Shadow, because he knew that only the dragon was the foundation of everything he had. The sky was slightly bright, and all the Tairoji warships that were staying in the port had been destroyed. Broken planks and charred wreckage floated on the sea, and thick black smoke rose to the sky. The port fell into chaos, with the groans of the wounded and the shouts of panic intertwined. When Lord Theron arrived at the port, Gavin's fleet had already left, and before leaving, they burned most of the merchant ships in the shipyard and 2 other ports. At this time, Tyrosh had completely lost the ability to go out to sea to fight. Fortunately, many merchant ships survived and were not completely cut off from the outside world. Lord Theron looked at the devastated port, his face so gloomy that it seemed like water could drip out of it. Anger burned in his heart, and he clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white from the force. The sea breeze whistled past, bringing endless bitterness and sadness. The surviving merchants gathered together, their faces filled with fear and despair. They had lost a large amount of goods and ships, and the loss of property made them feel heartbroken. They all ran to the palace of the Grand Lord to petition. In desperation, Theron could only choose to appease them. Although he had stored enough food in the city early on, other supplies could only be provided by these merchants. While he was busy discussing compensation plans with the merchants, Yoram Mormont had already led an army of 5,000 people onto the land of Essos and quickly seized a dock as soon as he landed. Then the 5,000-man army was divided into 3 groups and rushed to the surrounding towns and villages. Several towns and villages were quickly captured and all the food and treasures were looted. The slave owners trembled in fear. Their slaves were all taken away to help the invaders carry supplies. The slave owners who lost their guards could not resist the surging tide of invasion and could only watch. Any slave owner who did not cooperate was killed. The mercenaries, who had poor military discipline, not only looted everything, but also set the slave owners' homes on fire. Blood flowed freely on the land, gathering into scarlet streams, dyeing the earth red. The mercenaries seemed like ruthless war machines, driven by desire and ambition, tirelessly killing. The scene was even more chaotic when the shipyard was captured. The craftsmen were dragged roughly, surrounded by soldiers with swords, their faces full of fear and despair. The wood that could not be taken away was burned in the blazing fire. The flames shot up into the sky, devouring everything crazily. The scorching heat made the air distorted, and billowing black smoke filled the sky, as if it was the painful wail of the land. The fire crackled and burned, turning the entire shipyard into a sea of fire. However, Yoram Mormont's mission was not over yet. After a brief rest, they boarded the warship and headed for the next area. On the vast sea, the salty sea breeze blew gently, and the fleet moved slowly forward. As we gradually approached Mill Bay, the sea became calmer, like a huge piece of blue silk, shimmering with tiny waves. Gavin stood at the bow, gently caressing Jia Ying, who had just returned from foraging. After the battle, Jia Ying was exhausted, and the scales that had once shone brightly were now dull. It took a full night of rest before it had the strength to fly again. Unlike the previous state of being bathed in fire, although its combat capability in the state of being bathed in fire is very strong, the consumption of magic power is enormous. Moreover, after each bath in fire, it will lose its combat capability in a short period of time. If it lasts too long, even flying away will become difficult. As the fleet sailed smoothly, Gavin inadvertently discovered that a tiny black dot quietly emerged on the sea surface ahead. Soon after, more and more black dots appeared, densely packed together, just like an abrupt extra ink stain on a painting with thick ink and heavy colors. Gavin, who had many sailing experiences, knew at a glance that it was a large fleet. His eyes became serious instantly. Such a large fleet could not be composed of ordinary merchant ships. It was most likely the fleet of Mill. He did not expect that the two sides would encounter each other on this sea. The sea breeze seemed to feel the tense atmosphere and blew more urgently, wantonly fluttering the corners of Gavin's clothes, as if eagerly urging him to make a response decision. Gavin took a deep breath, his face stern, and immediately turned around and shouted to the soldiers behind him, "Notify the fleet and prepare for battle." His loud and majestic voice was clearly heard by everyone in the whistling sea breeze. Chapter 136. Encounter at Sea. The soldiers acted quickly and blew the horn to start the war. The strong sailors worked together to slowly push the heavy crossbows to the best position on the bow and side of the ship. They carefully adjusted the angles, and their meticulous appearance was only to ensure that the shooting could achieve the greatest accuracy. Their arm muscles were tense, and beads of sweat rolled down their cheeks, but no one had time to wipe them off. The soldiers in charge of ammunition methodically placed the sharp crossbow arrows neatly next to the bed crossbows so that they could be readily available for use in subsequent battles. Other soldiers hurriedly put on sturdy leather armor, carefully checked the swords in their hands, tightened the straps again and again, tied the shields firmly to their arms, and made full preparations for close combat. The Mill fleet had obviously also spotted the oncoming Gavin, and the same sharp and urgent horn sounded, with the battle flags fluttering in the wind, as if venting their desire to fight. The warships of both sides sped up, like two arrows shot from a bow, rushing towards the end of the collision without hesitation. Gavin held the railing tightly, his eyes sharp as torches, staring intently at the approaching enemy ship. His focused eyes seemed to take in every detail of the enemy ship. At this moment, Hassan, who received the news, hurried over. After Gavin handed over the command to Hassan, he hurried towards Jia Ying. As the two sides got closer and closer, they finally confirmed through the flags that the other side was Mill's fleet. The sea breeze was howling, becoming more and more fierce, as if cheering for the fierce battle that was about to break out. Just as the Mir warship was about to enter the range of the crossbow, Jia Ying took Gavin and flew into the sky. Then, Gavin's crossbow was the first to fire, and the sharp arrows shot towards the enemy ship like locusts. The dense rain of arrows was a deadly threat. The Mir side was obviously aware of the range of the bed crossbow and chose to endure it silently. They did not respond with a dense rain of arrows, but instead aimed the dragon hunting crossbow at the giant dragon hovering in the air to guard against the attack of dragon flame. After silently enduring a round of arrow rain, the Mir fleet quickly adjusted its formation. Their ships moved closely together to form a solid line of defense. Gavin was overlooking all this from the air. It was obvious that the commander of the Mill fleet understood that with only more than 50 warships, they could not defeat nearly 100 warships and a giant dragon in an encounter, so he planned to force his way through Gavin's fleet's formation and escape. Gavin quickly calculated a countermeasure in his mind. He couldn't let the other party escape with such a good opportunity. The blazing shadow roared 3 times in a rhythmic pattern in the air, and Hassan immediately understood the new instructions. Hassan decisively commanded the warships in the middle of the fleet to disperse and outflank the enemy from different directions, avoiding the opponent's collision route. The warships on both sides began to slow down and move towards the center, thickening the depth of the formation and forming a death channel. Once Mill's fleet enters this pocket formation, it will face fierce attacks from crossbows on both sides. At this time, the enemy fleet also began to counterattack. Their crossbow arrows were like violent raindrops, shooting at Gavin's fleet. Some soldiers were caught off guard and were unfortunately hit by arrows. The powerful impact of the crossbow arrows brought them into the sea and instantly engulfed by the surging waves. Not only that, but more crossbow arrows whistled in like a dense swarm of bees, fiercely hitting the ship. The solid planks were ruthlessly pierced by this fierce attack, and wood chips flew everywhere like fireworks. Finally, the mere fleet, which had no time to turn around, ran headlong into the formation of Gavin's fleet like a beast out of control. In an instant, the crossbows on both sides opened fire on them crazily, and the mere warships in the front were instantly targeted. Under this stormy attack, in less than a moment, they were shaky on the sea surface and began to tilt and slow down. Before the warships sank to the bottom of the sea, the warships coming from behind could not avoid it and hit the wreckage of the warships in front. The huge collision sound was deafening, and the subsequent warships forced their way through the wreckage of their own side and accelerated forward. But this brief deceleration still caused the formation of the mill fleet to be disrupted, and the chaotic situation caused ships to collide from time to time. The warships on both sides of the formation were in trouble. Many of them had their masts broken by the dense crossbow arrows. The warships lost their balance and were swaying on the sea. There were even several warships on both sides that were close to each other, and fierce sporting battles took place. Countless soldiers roared and boarded the mere warships, and a bloody and brutal hand-to-hand fight broke out in an instant. The soldiers' faces were full of ferocity, and they swung their swords with endless killing intent in every blow. Blood splattered everywhere, staining the deck red, and then flowed down to merge with the sea water. Soldiers from both sides fought desperately in a small space, with roars and shouts intertwined, like the roar of hell. Soldiers were constantly pierced by sharp swords and fell down in pain. This hand-to-hand combat was extremely cruel, and lives were lost every moment. Then, as more and more soldiers from Gavin's side joined the battle, the soldiers from Mill's side finally chose to surrender, and the warship was captured by Gavin's side. After suffering heavy losses of nearly half of its fleet, the mere fleet finally fought desperately to break through the formation of Gavin's fleet. At the moment when the first mere warship struggled to break through the formation, a black shadow suddenly rushed down from the gloomy sky like a swift lightning. The sea was turbulent, the wind was howling, and the salty sea water was muddied by the fierce battle. Jia Ying spread his huge wings and rushed straight towards the warship that had just successfully broken through, spurting out blazing dragon flames from his mouth. The dragon flames instantly wrapped around the bow of the warship. The wooden structure quickly burned under the high temperature, and the soldiers on the ship immediately shouted in terror. The blazing shadow's attack was incredibly swift, deadly, and ferocious, the dragon flames plowing fiercely through the warship's deck, tearing deep, shocking gashes into it. Under Jia Ying's fierce and ferocious attack, the warship's fire became more and more fierce, and thick smoke rose into the sky. Some soldiers were instantly devoured by the flames, while others jumped into the sea in panic. The breakthrough advantage that the Mill fleet had just achieved with great difficulty was instantly suppressed by Jia Ying's sudden and fierce attack. When Hassan saw the attack of the blazing shadow, he immediately ordered the horn to be blown. The passionate horn sound penetrated the noise of the wind and waves and echoed on the sea. The warships of Gavin's fleet responded quickly, like a group of brave hunters, and began to gather quickly, surrounding the Mill fleet tightly. The surging waves hit the warships violently, splashing white waves. Chapter 137. The White Flag of the Mir Fleet. Even though some Mir warships tried to break out of the encirclement with their last bit of strength, they were scared away by the giant dragon hovering in the sky. The huge body of the blazing shadow blocked out the sun in the sky, and it continuously sprayed blazing dragon flames at the Mir warships, as if it was the wrath of hell. The commander of the Mill fleet looked at the giant dragon that was raging in the sky and spraying dragon flames at his warships. His face was as pale as paper, and his eyes were full of despair and helplessness. He stood blankly at the bow, watching his warships fall into the sea of fire one by one, and the soldiers screamed one after another. His heart was filled with pain and struggle, knowing that continuing to resist would only lead to the loss of more lives and the destruction of the fleet. Finally, after a fierce ideological struggle, he trembled and gave the order to raise the white flag. The white flag fluttered weakly in the wind, announcing the end of this fierce naval battle. The sea breeze gradually subsided, and the silence of defeat permeated the sea. After the naval battle, although the soldiers of Gavin's fleet were exhausted, the joy of victory was overflowing on their faces. They began to rescue their injured comrades and clean up the battlefield. The soldiers of the Mill fleet were dejected and depressed. Most of their warships were badly damaged, and some were even slowly sinking. At the same time, the blazing shadow in the sky slowly landed on the deck of the Bel Aris. Gavin jumped off the dragon's back neatly, and he gently stroked the blazing shadow's scales that were emitting blazing heat, looking at the blazing shadow with concern in his eyes. At this time, Hassan also ran over anxiously, his face full of awe and excitement. Gavin looked far into the distance, looking at the magnificent scene in front of him, and couldn't help but feel a lot of emotion in his heart. The enemy's voluntary surrender contributed more than 20 intact warships to him at once, which was undoubtedly an unexpected gift. He immediately ordered Hassan to treat the prisoners well and arrange experienced personnel to repair the damaged warships with all their strength, and tow all the unsunk warships back to his own camp. Soon, the commander of the Mill fleet was brought before Gavin. Although he was not disarmed at Gavin's order, his broad and resolute shoulders collapsed weakly, his face was as pale as paper, and his bloodshot eyes were dim, as if he had lost all hope and fighting spirit. He staggered forward a few steps, then knelt on one knee, tremblingly took off the sword that symbolized glory and power from his waist, raised his hands high, and bowed his head deeply. He said in a trembling voice, "Respected Dragon King, I am the commander of the Mill fleet, Evan Stewart. I surrender to you on behalf of all the soldiers in the fleet. I sincerely hope that you can show mercy and spare our lives." Gavin stared at him with a sharp gaze, and said calmly and firmly, "Evan Stewart, I accept the surrender of you and your fleet, and I will guarantee the safety of all your lives as I said." Evan raised his head slowly, trembling, his eyes flickering, as if he was still experiencing a fierce struggle in his heart, and said, "Thank you for your kindness, Lord Dragon King." Then, Gavin asked coldly, "Tell me in detail about the situation in Mir, how many warships there are, and why you are here." After hearing this, Evan hesitated for a moment, as if he was weighing the pros and cons of being honest or concealing something. He finally said, Mir has less than 10 warships left, but the city is guarded by more than 5,000 Golden Group soldiers. We came here because we received a message from a carrier pigeon about your attack on Tyrosh, and we were ordered to come to support you." After listening to this, Gavin nodded slightly, as if thinking about something. He then asked, "The Golden Group should have tens of thousands of people, and I heard that Mir also hired the Second Sons. Why does Mir only have 5,000 people? What is the specific agreement of the Three Cities Alliance?" Evan lowered his head again, his voice so weak that it was almost inaudible. "I don't know, Lord Dragon King, I'm just an officer following orders, but not long ago, after the Three Cities Alliance was reached, most of Mir's slave soldiers and half of the Golden Group were sent to the junction of the center of the disputed land." After hearing this, Gavin frowned, thought for a moment and then said slowly, "Evan Stewart, I want you to help command your soldiers to repair the ship and clean up the battlefield. After the war is over, you can be free or join my fleet. It's up to you to choose." After hearing this, Evan felt as if he had been pardoned. He quickly stood up, bowed and said, "Thank you again for your kindness, Lord Dragon King. I promise that the surrendered soldiers will not cause you any trouble." After hearing this, Gavin nodded slightly, and then Evan Stewart was taken away. Hassan at the side asked worriedly, "My lord, if he is not lying, Mir has lost the ability to fight at sea. Should we still go to Mir Bay?" After hearing this, Gavin looked determined and answered decisively, "Go, you must go. Whether he lied or not, the main force of Mir's fleet is indeed here. My goal is to completely destroy their maritime power. Whether it is the existing warships or shipbuilding factories, they must all be destroyed without leaving any hidden dangers." After speaking, Gavin paused, and then ordered with a serious look, "It is enough for me to take 20 sailing warships to attack Mir Harbor. Since their shore defense force is insufficient, you take all the remaining warships to support Yora, and sweep all coastal towns with him. Burn all those that cannot be taken away, especially the shipyards. Don't leave any." After hearing this, Hassan immediately straightened his back and said in a firm tone, "I understand, sir. I will arrange it now." After that, he turned around and strode to carry out the order. Westeros the North. The king's motorcade moved forward slowly like a long winding dragon, with the iconic flag of a male deer with a crown fluttering in the wind, showing the king's majesty. Robert Baratheon, the king of the Seven Kingdoms, rode a tall and majestic black warhorse, his armor gleaming coldly in the weak sunlight. He held the reins tightly, his posture as tall as a mountain. The white knights beside him were all fully armed, with bright emblems on their shields and long swords clanging in their sheaths. The caravan had just passed Moat Cailin and was heading towards Winterfell along the King's Road. The magnificent carriage bumped forward in the middle of the procession, the wheels sank deeply into the mud and struggled to pull themselves out, making dull sounds. The curtains of the carriage windows were occasionally blown up by the wind, revealing the gorgeous decorations inside and Queen Cersei's slightly tired but still proud face. Her eyes swept across the desolate landscape of the north, her brows knitted, her lips pursed. She was unwilling to set foot on this cold, strange, and rough land, but Robert Baratheon's determination made her realize that she had no way to resist. Chapter 138. The King arrives. Cersei clutched the handkerchief tightly in her hand, her knuckles turning white from the effort. She cursed this damn journey in her heart, and cursed Robert for letting her come here. Jaime rode a white horse, wearing gorgeous golden armor, guarding the side of the wheelhouse. He accidentally saw Cersei's gloomy face through the window, and hurriedly pulled the reins to let the horse under his crotch approach the wheelhouse where Cersei was. "Cersei," he said in a low voice, trying not to be heard by others, "don't be so unhappy. I'll come find you when we set up camp later." Cersei turned her head and glared at him. "That's easy for you to say. This bumpy ride is almost swallowing me up." Jaime smiled and said, "Be patient, dear sister. Besides, this journey is a small price to pay for killing Jon Arryn. Robert can only continue to hunt wild boars and find prostitutes if he finds a new hand." Cersei snorted coldly and said, "The price? You should be thankful. If I hadn't acted quickly, our heads would have been hung on the city wall. I just didn't expect Robert to give the position of hand to the north. I thought the position of hand would be given to my father." Jaime sighed lightly, shook his head and said, "It's not that there is no chance. I don't think Eddard Stark wants to be the Prime Minister. So many ravens have not called him to King's Landing. These northerners always like to stay in their own place." Just then, the little devil came waddling over on a pony. When Cersei saw him, her face became even uglier. "Humph, this ugly monster." After that, she slammed the curtains shut. Jaime leaned slightly towards the window. "Cersei." Cersei didn't respond from inside the car. The little devil looked at the closed car window, shrugged, and smiled at James. "It seems that our queen is in a very bad mood." James smiled helplessly. "This journey is not easy." The little devil raised his eyebrows and said with a hint of self-mockery, "I don't care. I'm not welcome anywhere anyway. It's just right for me to come to the north to have some fun." James asked, "I heard you're planning to visit that damn place called the Wall." The little devil smiled and said, "Who knows, maybe there's also the famous Mole's Town. Of course, I must also visit the brothel in the Winter Town." After saying that, the little devil turned his horse around and slowly walked away. James looked at his brother's back and sighed softly. After another 3 days of trekking, the king's caravan finally saw the outline of Winterfell at dusk. The afterglow of the setting sun gave this northern castle a warm golden edge, but it could not conceal its solemn and majestic aura. Winterfell in the distance was like a giant beast rising from the earth, with towering walls and towers standing majestically. The dire wolf flag flying on the wall danced in the wind, as if greeting the guests from afar. As the convoy got closer, the sound of horse hooves and wheels became clearer in the silent air. Robert stood up straight, his eyes fixed on the castle that was about to greet them, while Cersei still had a gloomy expression and showed no interest in the scene before her. The king's motorcade entered the castle, the wheels making crisp sounds on the cobblestone road. Ned Stark, the Duke of Winterfell and the Warden of the North, had been waiting quietly at the castle gate with his family. Ned was wearing a heavy fur cloak, his face was serious and solemn, his eyes showed determination and calmness. Standing next to him was his wife Catelyn, who was wearing a dark green dress, elegant and dignified. The eldest son Robb and his younger brothers and sisters stood beside their parents. The young eldest son inherited his father's perseverance and his mother's wisdom. He was dressed in armor and looked heroic. Sansa was wearing a pink dress, with her hands folded in front of her, a sweet smile on her face, and her heart was full of longing for court life. Arya was wearing clothes that were easy for her to move in. Her hair was a little messy. Her eyes were lively and she kept looking around, seeming a little impatient. Bran stood at the back, his small body wrapped in thick clothes, his eyes bright and clear, staring curiously at the approaching convoy in the distance. Rickon was held in the nanny's arms. He didn't quite understand the importance of the scene before him. He just babbled and waved his little hands. Behind them, the guards of Winterfell stood in neat rows with solemn expressions, ready to welcome the king. The whole scene was quiet and solemn, as if time had stopped at this moment. Robert was riding on his horse. When he saw his old friend whom he hadn't seen for many years, he dismounted and walked over. When the Stark family saw the king dismount, they all knelt down. Robert stepped forward, pulled Ned Stark up, tapped him lightly on the chest, and said with a smile, "You've gained weight, Ned." Ned Stark bowed and said, "Winterfell is at your service, your majesty." The two smiled at each other and hugged each other. Robert then greeted each member of the Stark family one by one, and Cersei also got off the carriage and greeted them politely. After the queen greeted everyone, Robert said to Eddard impatiently, "Take me to your family's crypt, I want to show my respect." Cersei, who was standing by, had a gloomy face after hearing this and wanted to say something but held back. The cold and damp tomb was filled with the smell of decay. Robert and Ned walked slowly forward side by side. The dim candle light flickered on the stone wall, reflecting their solemn faces. "Ned, I sincerely hope you can serve as Prime Minister. I urgently need your help now. There is no one around me I can trust," Robert said eagerly and sincerely while taking heavy steps. His voice echoed in the empty crypt with a bit of anxiety and expectation. Ned frowned, his eyes were solemn. He shook his head slightly and said in a low voice, "Robert, Stark belongs to the North, and the North cannot do without Stark. I have no intention of getting involved in the turmoil in the South." As he spoke, he took out the letter he had just received from his arms and handed it to Robert. "This is a raven message sent from the Stepstones to the Seven Kingdoms. The letter says that you sent someone to assassinate Daenerys Targaryen. Robert, is this true?" Robert took the letter and glanced at it quickly. His face turned gloomy and terrifying in an instant, and veins popped out on his forehead. "Humph, yes, this is true, I have to do this. That remnant actually has a dragon, and her fiancé Gavin Bellarys even has a grown-up golden dragon and a fleet of the Stepstone Islands. This has seriously threatened the Iron Throne. Look. Now this Gavin Bellarys dares to arrogantly propose a duel with me in the letter. Obviously, he has long since stopped taking me, the king, seriously." Robert waved his strong arms angrily, his eyes wide open, his teeth clattering, and roared, "I will smash his ignorant head with my own hands." Chapter 139, Wolf-Deer Marriage. Ned looked at Robert with disappointment and confusion in his eyes. He tried to persuade him earnestly, "Robert, no matter what, you shouldn't have sent people to kill the brother and sister. Besides, the girl is just a child. Such behavior is really disgraceful. What do the nobles of the Seven Kingdoms think of you?" Robert's eyes widened with rage when he heard this, and he almost roared, "Glory! Ned, have you forgotten how your sister Lyanna died tragically at the hands of Rhaegar? Were the actions of the Mad King and his son Rhaegar honorable? You can't rule the Seven Kingdoms with glory alone. After this trip to the north, I plan to attack the Stepstones. I need your help, Ned. A king cannot be without a prime minister." Ned's eyes flashed with pain for a moment after hearing this, and then he said, "Robert, of course I haven't forgotten, but I will never use such despicable means of assassination to deal with an innocent child. You have really changed after becoming king. You would never do this before. Let the child go, Robert. With the army of the Seven Kingdoms, they can't take anything away from her." The two of them refused to give in to each other and started arguing fiercely, with their words becoming more and more intense. However, after a few words, they were like deflated balls, falling into a suffocating silence. The tomb was terribly quiet for a while, with only the faint flickering of the candlelight and the slightly heavy breathing of the two people intertwined. After a long time, Robert finally broke the oppressive silence. His eyes slowly fell on an exquisitely carved female stone statue, his eyes revealed endless affection and remembrance, and his voice became soft and sad, "All the remnants of the dragon family deserve to die, and the blood debt they owe must be repaid." After hearing this, Ned remained silent, just lowered his head slightly with a complicated expression. Robert took a deep breath and tried to calm himself. His tone was much softer. He patted Ned on the shoulder and said, "Ned, ever since Jon left me, I feel that King's Landing has fallen into chaos. Everyone in the council has their own purpose. I am surrounded by Lannisters and yes-men. I have always been the only one who has caused Jon the most trouble. Now that he has left me, I really need your help. Help me, Ned. You are the only person I trust the most." His eyes were full of sincerity and eagerness, and his voice trembled slightly in the cold tomb, with a hint of imperceptible fragility. Ned looked at Robert, his expression complicated and tangled, his brows tightly furrowed, his eyes revealing hesitation and struggle. After a long while, he sighed and said helplessly, "Okay, Robert, I need to discuss this with Catherine. After all, this is not just my business." Robert's eyes flashed with joy, and that joy was like a beam of bright light, dispelling the haze on his face. He held Ned's shoulders tightly, with such strength that it seemed as if he wanted to convey all his expectations and trust in his heart. "Ned, I know you won't abandon me. I plan to marry our two families, my heir Joffrey and your daughter Sansa. I think Catelyn will agree." Ned was silent for a long time, various thoughts and possible situations flashing through his mind. Finally, as if he had made a great decision, he nodded slowly and said, "In that case, Robert, then I will do as you say. I hope our decision will bring happiness to the children." Robert showed a satisfied smile on his face, which looked particularly brilliant under the dim candlelight. "With the cooperation of the wolf and the deer, the kingdom will be back on track." The two looked at each other, and in this gloomy tomb, the atmosphere finally eased a little. Just when Robert was leisurely visiting the north, indulging in hunting and wine, enjoying the peace and leisure. In the disputed area far across the narrow sea, a completely different and tragic scene was presented. The flames of war raged like a demon, devouring everything. The towns of Myr and Tyrosh were breached one after another, with flames shooting into the sky and black smoke billowing. Countless treasures, money, food and supplies were plundered, and slaves were driven onto ships by soldiers and became the spoils of the victors. The once busy shipyards along the coast have now become ruins, with broken walls swaying in the wind. Tyrosh and Myr, with no troops, can only defend the city, looking at the tragic scene outside in despair, but unable to lend a helping hand. Their hearts are bleeding, and anger and helplessness are intertwined. Malacca received many requests for help and sent out troops to rescue them anxiously. However, facing the long coastline, they were always one step behind. When the reinforcements hurriedly arrived, all they saw was a charred ruin with the remaining smoke telling of the catastrophe that had just been experienced. Even when the reinforcements were insufficient, they were met with ambushes and roaring dragons in the sky. Faced with the army that landed casually on the coast, the angry Malacca was anxious and sent letter after letter urging the Volantis fleet to arrive as soon as possible. Over the past few days, his face was distorted by excessive anxiety and anger, veins bulged on his forehead, his eyes were bloodshot, and every wrinkle was filled with anxiety and uneasiness. But he could only pace back and forth in the tent, cursing Gavin's army and the delayed fleet. At this time, Tyrosh and Myr also began to have deep doubts about Malacca's command ability. Complaints and accusations came one after another like a tide. If Volantis' fleet had not arrived yet and the battle situation was undecided, I am afraid that the Three Cities alliance would have been dissolved long ago. At the same time, in the Stepstone Islands, Boris received Gavin's order and took action without stopping. He either used forceful conscription or hired people at great expense to mobilize all available ships to support Gavin's increasingly urgent transportation capacity. Ships of various sizes and shapes shuttled back and forth on the sea, busy transporting the astonishingly large amount of spoils. Seeing the governor's office's big move and the rich spoils that kept coming in, the entire Stone Steps archipelago seemed to be thrown into a shocking boulder, stirring up 1,000 waves. In the streets and alleys, people gathered in groups of 3 or 5, whispering to each other, speculating about where the Lord had gone to war again, and judging from the amazing gains, it was obvious that the situation was extremely favorable to them. Some well-informed businessmen swarmed in and hurried to the governor's palace like sharks smelling blood. There was a gleam of greed in their eyes, and they were eager to get a share of this huge profit. Marjorie Tyrell, who happened to be visiting here, and Quentin Martell, who came from Dorne, also noticed something strange about the Stepstones and sent people to inquire about the news. Chapter 140, Volantis Fleet. The Highgarden Master, Fortimo Crane, was in a hurry. His steps were quick and powerful, as he passed through the flower-filled paths of the seaside manor. The sea breeze blew gently, stirring the corners of his clothes, but it failed to slow down his pace. As we walked into the manor, the sun shone on the colorful flower beds, casting a dreamy light and shadow. In the pavilion not far away, Margaret was chatting and laughing with her maids, and her silver bell-like laughter floated in the air. Fortimo Crane stepped forward quickly and saluted Marjorie. "Miss Marjorie, I have learned the details. Gavin Bellarus has already successfully occupied Linlith, and now for some unknown reason, he is fighting with Tyrosh and Myr. However, Judging from the spoils unloaded at those ports, the battle situation should be good. Hearing this, the smile on Margaret's face froze instantly, and her beautiful eyes opened wide, full of surprise. She never expected that Gavin's attack would be so smooth and that he would successfully capture Lys in such a short time. Judging from this situation, Gavin's strength will surely grow stronger. If he completely solves the threat of Essos, it will probably be beyond the control of the Tyrell family, which will be extremely disadvantageous for the subsequent negotiations. Originally, the Tyrell family planned to summon Gavin to Highgarden in the name of Marjorie's name day, and let the experienced and shrewd Lady Olenna negotiate with Gavin, but unexpectedly, Gavin refused the invitation on the grounds that a war had broken out. Now that her grandmother was no longer around, the burden of decision-making fell on Margaret's shoulders. After thinking for a moment, Margaret said firmly, "Let's get ready. We'll set off for Lys tomorrow." After hearing this, Fotimo Crane's expression instantly became solemn. He quickly advised, "Miss Marjorie, I don't recommend you go to Lys at this time. Obviously, the war there has not ended. Bandits are rampant in the Three Daughters Kingdom, and those people are very barbaric. It is too risky to go there rashly. If possible, it is best to let the Redwine family provide us with a few warships to escort us, so as to ensure safety." Marjorie shook her head and said, "It will be too late to send a message back to Highgarden. I want to see Gavin before the war is over. Besides, aren't the ships that travel back and forth safe? Let's go to Lys first to see the situation and then make a decision." Looking at Margaret's resolute expression, Fotimo Crane knew that she was determined to leave and it would be difficult to persuade her. If he continued to persuade her, he would appear to be timid. Helplessly, he could only sigh heavily and agree, "Okay, Miss Margaret, I hope everything goes well on this trip." At the same time, in an inn on Bloodstone Island, Quentin Martell also learned about the war between Gawain and Tyrosh and Myr. He made a prompt decision and asked the guards to contact the ship to Rees, and said anxiously, "The sooner the better, set off as soon as possible." The guard looked embarrassed and advised, "Sir, there is still a war going on over there. Do you need to ask Prince Daolang for his opinion on this matter?" After hearing this, Quentin Martell hesitated for a moment, then said with a firm look, "Just go find Governor Boris and send a raven to my father to inform him of the situation here. Isn't Lys very safe now? And Daenerys is there. If possible, it would be better to see her first." After hearing this, the guard said no more and left. Marjorie Tyrell and Quentin Malty were not the only ones eager to go to Lys. A huge fleet of 130 warships was also speeding towards the island of Lys. The fleet ploughed through the waves, the oars on both sides of the ships rising and falling in unison, splashing layers of white foam. On the towering masts, the Volantis flag with an orange background and a black tiger fluttered in the wind. The commander of the fleet, Narek Wysama, was standing on the bow of the flagship with a frown on his face. He took the letter from the carrier pigeon, glanced at it quickly, and threw it aside. Seeing this, the deputy beside him smiled bitterly and asked, "Is it because of Governor Madario's urging?" Narek said to his deputy unhappily, "He wants to send us 10 letters a day to make up for his lost prestige. The fleet can only go so fast. What's the point of being so anxious?" After hearing this, the deputy speculated, "Sir, do you think that the war in the disputed land is not going well, which forced Governor Madako to do this?" After hearing this, Narek did not answer, but stared at the sea ahead, with a lot of thoughts in his mind. He is the eldest son of Nessiso Wysama, the Archon of the Elephantine. As a member of the Elephantine, he has always opposed going to war with a Valyrian Dragon Lord. Even if it means taking the disputed land, he believes that cooperating with the Dragon Lord is far better than Tyrosh and Myr. He really couldn't understand how Malachar had convinced his father and the other Elephant Party Archon. But now that the matter was done and the fleet had set sail for the battlefield, he felt extremely helpless and worried. Once, Aegon rode the Black Death to defeat Volantis, and it took Volantis decades to recover. If Volantis loses this time, it may fall into chaos and decline again. Just as Narek's thoughts were racing, his deputy hurriedly shook him. He looked at his deputy curiously, only to see that his deputy had a serious expression and was staring straight ahead. Narek followed his gaze curiously and saw countless black spots appearing on the sea level. A fleet no less numerous than theirs suddenly appeared in front of them. The sea breeze seemed to stagnate at this moment. Narek's heartbeat suddenly accelerated, and fine beads of sweat unconsciously seeped out of his forehead. His throat was dry and he tightly gripped the hilt of the sword in his hand. The gradually clear outline of the fleet was like a heavy mountain, pressing him down to the point where he could hardly breathe. As an experienced fleet commander, Narek roughly judged the size of the opposing fleet with just a glance. However, the scene before him was completely different and far from what Malakar had described before. The number of warships owned by the Dragon King was not inferior to that of Volantis, and even exceeded expectations. Nearly half of the sailing ships had huge sails fluttering in the sea breeze, like unstoppable beasts. Narek's face suddenly became darker and darker, as if water could drip out of it. He clenched his teeth tightly, and the muscles in his cheeks trembled slightly, showing his extreme tension and anxiety. His brows were furrowed into a deep shape, and the ravine seemed to be full of worries and contemplation. Narek took a deep breath, trying to calm himself down and prepare to deal with the situation at hand. "Blow the horn and notify the fleet to prepare to meet the enemy," he ordered his deputy beside him.